Chapter 76. In the royal capital, Lilith, who had finished praying for the day, was meeting the Pope under the guidance of the nuns. Since the death of Augustine III, the entire royal capital has become as quiet as a pool of stagnant water. Kotick, the prime minister who had been constantly clamoring for his hero in the past, has been unusually low-key recently, doing nothing except reporting to the new king regularly. Lilith has not been in a good mood recently, and the plot of this world has completely collapsed. If the original plot was just a little abstract, the current plot can be said to be outrageous. The old king died under suspicious circumstances, the Grand Duke of the North was killed by his own son, and the Lars family was completely divided. Although Lilith has only played the first part, because she is a heavy player, Lilith has seen the planning news of the second part on the social media of the main creator. Judging from the clues, shouldn't the second part involve a tit-for-tat confrontation with the kingdom of Anjou in the south? Why did the north explode first? Is it because the heroine went to the north? For Lilith, the most disturbing thing is that the plot is completely beyond her understanding. And according to the latest news, the camp where the heroine and Reina are, the grey-collar worker, just won an incredible war, and the leader is the NPC whose name sounds the same as her brother. The north is now in complete chaos. These may have nothing to do with Lilith, but Crane, the male protagonist of Lilith's main strategy, has now ascended to the throne in advance. Although it was a peaceful handover, the succession process was not really exciting. The strange current situation of Augustine III has become an open secret among the nobles. Now Crane not only has to support the declining kingdom and balance the situation in the north, but also beware of the Anjou kingdom, which starts making moves early. After succeeding to the throne, Crane was under great pressure. He often cried to Lilith late at night, and sometimes asked about political matters. He also showed Lilith some reform plans that imitated the kingdom of Anjou, which even made Lilith angry. She had the illusion of being a mother. As a saint and a quasi-princess, Lilith does not have the feeling at all that the girl and the prince lived a happy life in the ending of the fairy tale in the original work. Sometimes Lilith even feels that she may not be the princess-to-be, but the Queen Mother. His Holiness the Pope. Lilith used the most standard etiquette to salute the old Pope. The old Pope nodded slightly and motioned for Lilith to sit down. Everyone around them retreated. Tonight, the Pope issued an order that there were very important things to discuss with the saint in detail. Although he is the Pope, at this moment the old Pope is dressed in cloth, even with some traces of sewing. It can be seen that the old Pope is also very tired. The goddess of light sect is no longer as prosperous as it used to be. Although it is still the main faith on the mainland, it can only shrink in the Cape Kingdom and become a vase of vassal royal power. Is the old king feeling better? The old king here refers to Augustine III, but Lilith does not understand. Augustine III is no different from death and has become a vegetative person who needs help from others to eat. There is no new news from the palace. Lilith also answered truthfully. If she were the real heroine, maybe she would be able to find some clues. But Lilith is just a fake. Her becoming a saint is more a matter of political factors, unlike the original heroine who became a saint by her own strength. The saint is completely different. After hearing this answer, the old Pope hesitated for a moment and then slowly stood up. He came to the hanger where his papal crown was placed, slowly opened a hidden compartment, and took out a small lantern shining with bright yellow light. Seeing Lilith's confused expression towards the lantern, the old Pope felt relieved, put the lantern next to him and sat down again. Only then did Lilith see that the lantern in the lantern was not a wick, but a piece of a strange stone that shines with light. These lights are not dazzling, you can even look directly at them, and just looking at these lights gives you a feeling of peace of mind. The old Pope did not directly introduce the lantern, but said to Lilith, "Come on, let us first pray to the goddess and thank the goddess for allowing us to spend another peaceful and stable day." After Lilith prayed devoutly, the old Pope asked, "Saint Lilith, do you remember the authority of the goddess? Light, healing and purifying, and the sun, moon, and stars, day and night." The first three that Lilith said are also the standard answers for church school exams, and the next few are basically only known by clergy and devout believers. The goddess of light has many other names: Our Lady of Rescue, Light of Punishment, God of Healing, Lord of the Sun, Moon, and Stars. Therefore, the goddess has the most authority and is also the most complicated. A scholar who studied theology and history once complained, if you encounter something or an event and you don't know which god's authority it should be attributed to, then praying to the goddess will definitely be useless. Wrong. It's a bit like modern archaeology digging up something strange and throwing it into the sacrificial column. The old Pope nodded and added, people's belief in light first came from the sun, moon, and stars in the sky, and the goddess was originally in charge of the sun, moon, and stars, and the god of the alternation of day and night. Later, she became the god of light. The goddess has many powers, and these powers are closely related to our magic. But Saint Lilith, do you know that dreams are also the goddess's authority? For a moment, Lilith thought of Augustine III lying on the bed, half dead, in the same state as if he was asleep. Seeing Lilith's expression, the old Pope pushed the original lantern in front of Lilith. This lamp contains star fragments given by the goddess. It is also an oracle from the goddess. It can guide people in dreams, and can also enter other people's dreams. Use this lamp to protect His Majesty the new king. Lilith did not take the lantern immediately, but asked, "Sir Pope, what would happen if someone entered someone else's dream and killed the owner of the dream? Didn't you already see it?" Sure enough, Lilith broke out in cold sweat for a moment. "Don't be so nervous." The old Pope consoled him, "It is very difficult to enter other people's dreams, and the conditions are very harsh. If no one helps, it will be difficult for anyone to enter the dream of His Majesty the new king. Is there a mole among those who have access to the palace? It was related to Crane's safety, so Lilith asked directly without caring about etiquette. It's not impossible that the inner ghost is in the palace. The old pope directly stated his worst guess. Your Holiness, someone entered Father Crane's dream and killed him. Does this mean that the other party also has this lantern? Why should such an important thing be hidden in a secret compartment? Lilith changed her previous dignified and intellectual attitude and began to eagerly ask the old pope for useful information. Do you still remember the incident where the saint ran away 200 years ago? The old pope spoke slowly. The current public opinion is that the saint at that time came into contact with heretics and was contaminated by heretical teachings. She took away a large number of believers and spread twisted teachings. As a result, she broke with the Holy See and started wars with other faiths. But the real situation is that there were no heretics. The saint at that time understood the heretical teachings after praying under these two lanterns. And the more devout the saints were at that time, the more they recognized the saint's teachings. Doctrine eventually led to divisions and wars in the Holy See. The star fragments in these two lanterns were originally the oracle given by the goddess and the last miracle of the goddess. We made them into lanterns, which means that the goddess is like a bright light guiding us forward. But I didn't expect that the more devout a believer is, the easier it is to become a heretic when praying under a lantern, so after the saint became a heretic, we hid the lantern, but it was a pity that it was a little late. A lantern has been stolen by the saint at that time. After saying this, the old pope and Lilith looked at each other awkwardly. Obviously, both Lilith and the old pope had prayed around the lantern, but they seemed to have no reaction. Don't be nervous, Saint Lilith. Being able to look at the goddess objectively may not be a bad thing. Neither of the two highest-ranking members of the Holy See seemed that pious. Chapter 77. Lilith left the old pope's prayer room with a complicated mood and returned to the palace to wait for Crane to get off work. The lantern is very small and has a special mechanism that can cover the light of the lantern. It doesn't feel out of place when worn around the waist. But Lilith felt that the small lantern was extremely heavy. Didn't she travel back in time to become the protagonist and enjoy life? But now things are developing more and more horrifyingly, and Lilith even regrets that she took over the role of the heroine. Now for the sake of my own happy life, I must protect Kellen at all costs. Not only that, domestic reforms must also find ways to help Kellen advance. Although I studied with my elder brother for a while before time travel, some reform decrees have not yet been implemented. The resistance is greater than imagined. At present, the reform can only be carried out in small-scale pilot reforms in areas controlled by the church. But fortunately, due to the increasing pressure from Anru, the southern and western regions also began to cooperate with the royal capital in carrying out a small number of reforms. At this time, Lilith understood why the internal reformists in history had a high probability of failure. Even if they succeeded, they would only survive. But there was no way. Crane's identity meant that he would not be able to overthrow the kingdom and start over, so Lilith could only try your best to carve as many patterns as you can on the turd left behind by Augustine III. The palace was still brightly lit at this moment, and Crane, who had just ascended the throne, had no time to hold any more balls, but was still sitting in the conference room. The last topic is about the northern border. The remaining people in the conference room are basically the kingdom's top decision makers, which also shows that the remaining issues are no longer accessible to the lower level nobles. We need to re-examine the issue of the northern territory. Archduke Lars is gone. Now the entire northern territory has been torn apart. Rhaena Lars and her fiancé Copyright have defeated the nobles in the western part of the northern territory and are integrating the forces in the western part of the northern territory. And the other three Lars who killed Archduke Lars are also busy dividing their own spheres of influence. Crane no longer had the frivolity he had when he was the crown prince, and his whole person began to become solemn, calm, and a little tired. My opinion is that we should ease the relationship with the northern territory, but not too relaxed. At least on the surface, the kingdom will withdraw its deployment in the northern territory. Kotick, who had always been very active in the issue of the northern territory, now became the prime minister of the clay sculpture. He could only reread the words, and would only express his opinions when the demon clan issues were mentioned in the previous few. Duke of the East, Monroe added to Crane, we need to calm down those mad dogs in Lars. We have the largest border with the north, and several of their soldiers have been plundering our territory. If they don't take care of it, I will take action myself. Crane nodded, indicating that he understood. Duke Scott of the Western Territory also suggested, our Western Territory and Southern Territory have been under great pressure recently. The kingdom can no longer waste resources on the Northern Territory. Your Majesty, I suggest following your father's will. After giving out the stick, it's time to give the carrot. Then how about making those Lars governors? Crane humbly sought the opinions of the nobles present. The official position of governor can be traced back to the Roman Empire. The current kingdom does not have a regional governor, but it is indeed a good position to control the Lars. At this time, Judith, the Duchess of the Southern Territory who had been silent, spoke up, so, regarding the western part of the Northern Territory, Your Majesty can appoint Rhaena's fiancé Copyright Linde as the governor. Not only can he sow discord between Linde and Lars, and it can also give the other party a step up to prevent them from becoming rebels. Scott nodded in agreement and said, Your Majesty, if a rebellion is declared in the western part of the Northern Territory, then the Kingdom of Anjou is likely to get in touch with these rebels. By then, the pressure on our western and southern territories will be even greater. At least on the surface, the kingdom there can be no rebels inside. But Monroe sarcastically said, Judith, I heard that Linde is also a descendant of the Empire. Are you colluding with these rebels? Crane reminded, Duke Monroe, please pay attention to your words. There are no rebels in our kingdom, and Linde may not be a descendant of the Empire. My fiancé copyright E also has black hair and black eyes. Is she also a descendant of the Empire? In short, the matter regarding the Northern Territory has finally been finalized. Crane plans to appoint 4 Northern Territory governors at one go, but this governor has an empty name, and the real power and territory are all up to each governor to fight for. The words are written on the appointment letter. After the meeting, Crane felt a little more relaxed when he saw Lilith still waiting for him in the aisle. As usual, after listening to Crane explain the key points of today's meeting, Lilith complained feebly in her heart, isn't it true that the way the Northern Territory handles things won't raise a poison to create a monster? For her own future happiness, Lilith suggested when Crane asked her for advice, Your Majesty, why do you want to grant 4 governors at one time? You can give it to Governor Linde first, and then to Governor Doug Lars, establish the leadership position of Doug Lars to prevent the 3 Lars from starting a melee, and by doing this, after one governor is defeated, the next governor can be quickly appointed to confront the winning governor. A 4-party melee is difficult to control, but a strong showdown is easy. There is no need to worry. If Doug Lars wins, he will really be able to unify the North. It is impossible for 3 Lars who relied on conspiracy to kill their father to work together. Yes, just support new puppets when the time comes. The more Crane thought about it, the more he felt that this plan was better, and immediately praised, Lilith, you still have a way, I can't wait for you to become my princess. Judith, the Duchess of the South, couldn't wait to take a bath after returning to her mansion, wanting to wash away the fatigue of the day. Today's new king is very stressed and very insecure, causing the nobles in the royal capital to meetings were held every 3 days, and the current situation was chaotic, making everyone exhausted. Any new letters from my distant cousin? Judith was naturally referring to Caroline. Since the last letter from Caroline was sent, Judith immediately checked the genealogy. Not yet, sir. Miss Caroline just finished the war and may be busy. At the same time, the maid also asked curiously, Sir, is that Linde really a descendant of the Empire? Judith's answer was somewhat ambiguous, there was indeed a bloodline of the Empire that went north, but who knows? Although that was said, when she thought of the name of the ancestor who fled to the north in the family tree, Judith sighed in her heart that her distant brother was still too impatient. Not only could the status of descendant of the Empire not be provided, if you don't help, you may put yourself in danger. I have no choice but to help a little bit. At this time, Claire was looking at the north from the windowsill of her castle, with neither maids to serve nor guards to protect her. Is there any news from over there? Claire seemed to be talking to the void. And a voice in the void responded to Claire, Don't be anxious, someone has already brought a lantern to the north, and the time should be almost here now. Then, a figure appeared beside the windowsill following the black fog. Is it really okay to waste such a precious opportunity on an unknown person? Even if that person is really a descendant of the Empire, it is not worth the power of the wick. The figure gradually became clearer, it was a nun wearing a slit nun's uniform. If you look carefully, you can see that the nun's uniform is a modified version of the nun's uniform from the Church of the Goddess of Light. Actually, we can use the wick on someone more deserving, such as your brother. No chance. Claire retorted, My brother has realized something and started to restrict foreign ministers from entering the palace. He has also started to investigate the interior of the palace. It will be difficult for me to help you arrange the rune array in the short term. That's such a shame. The voluptuous nun seemed genuinely sorry. Don't worry, we still have a long time. Let's get on the line with Anju first. I can't wait to see my brother exhausted. Claire licked her lips and looked back in the direction of the king's palace. Chapter 78. Brother, what are you doing? After hearing this sound, Linde came back to his senses from the daze. At this time, Lin Li was pointing in front of her. If you want to sleep, you can wait until you're on the plane. I won't care about you if you fall asleep at the airport. Only then did Linde remember that he and several colleagues had participated in a publicly funded trip organized by the school. Oh no, it was an academic exchange. Now he was waiting for his flight at the airport. Lin Li was here to see him off. Somehow, seeing Lin Li's arrogant and disdainful face, Linde suddenly felt a very nostalgic feeling. Including the sound of radio broadcasts from the surrounding airports, the sound of the bald Gao Shu Wang and his wife talking on the phone next to him, and even the sound of the mobile phone loudspeaker made Linde extremely nostalgic. After hearing the sound announcing boarding, Linde instinctively walked towards the boarding gate, but was pulled down by Lin Li. Hey bro, where is your girlfriend? My girlfriend? Linde asked in surprise. Aren't you single from birth? Where did you get your girlfriend? But Lin Li showed an expression of disbelief and said, Didn't you always spend the whole day together? She heard that you were going on a trip this time. Oh no, it was an academic exchange, and she even bought a plane ticket to go with you. Come on. At this time, a voice came from the noisy crowd, Sorry, I'm late, am I not late? A girl with blonde hair and blue eyes waved to Linde as she ran. Linde seemed to have remembered that Reina was indeed his girlfriend, and the two of them did stay together every day. Lin Li hit Linde with her elbow and said quietly, Where did you find such a beautiful sister-in-law? No wonder you haven't gone home recently. Linde was speechless. Isn't it because he has been busy with work recently and has to rush to review his professional title? But when did he meet Reina? Why can't he remember it? Reina finally ran to Linde and asked, I'm sorry, dear, I'm late, am I not late? Lin Li immediately said, No, sister-in-law, you came just in time. But at this time, Linde was stunned, grabbed Reina's hand and asked, what did you call me just now? Honey? Are you okay? Reina waved her hand in front of Linde's eyes and asked Linde with concern. Shouldn't you call me brother? Linde didn't know why, but this sentence came out of his mouth. Lin Li on the side laughed and said, who would call their boyfriend brother? Brother, are you crazy about your thesis? In an instant, complete memories flowed into Linde's mind. I'm really tired recently. Let's go board the plane first. Linde regained his composure, grabbed Reina's hand and walked towards the boarding gate. Have fun, brother, and don't forget my souvenirs. Lin Li was still waving her hands from behind, but Linde was already sweating coldly, if you can sweat in your dreams. This was a dream, Linde was 100% sure. If Reina hadn't suddenly appeared, Linde might have really thought that he was rushing out of his paper and got confused. Not only that, Linde noticed that not far from him, there was a nun who was incompatible with the surrounding environment. She was holding a lantern and looking at the surrounding environment curiously. However, the pedestrians around did not seem to see this nun who seemed to have come from nowhere. She looks like a nun who just came from a comic show. When Linde boarded the plane, the strange nun ignored the security check and boarded the plane not far behind Linde. Linde thought about the current situation carefully. He knew that he was in a dream, but this dream turned into a lucid dream for some reason. And a strange outsider seems to have appeared in his dream. Is it an enemy? Is there any strange magic related to dreams in this world? There should be none in my impression. Linde did not dare to act rashly, so he had to follow the plot in his dream and wait for the plane to take off. It's incredible. What era of technology is this? Can humans actually reach such a high altitude? While Linde was trying to figure out what he could do in his dream, the nun holding the lantern looked out the window excitedly. Still, no one noticed this strange nun and allowed the nun to climb up and down the plane. Isn't this giant bird controlled by magic power? Why can it break through the limit of magic power and reach such a high altitude? If you can reach the sky with this, then what's the point of mages building towers? The nun wearing a slit nun's uniform kept exclaiming. The plane flew smoothly in the stratosphere, and the nun was constantly inspecting the cabin. Linde had no choice but to pretend not to notice, and pretended to be dozing off while Lina fell asleep on his shoulder, observing the other person. Through current observations, it can be found that although the nun does not look like a person in this dream world, and no one else except Linde is aware of the existence of this nun is also affected by Linde's dream. For example, the door to the captain's cabin is sealed, and this strange nun cannot walk through the wall in Linde's dream to see what the captain's cabin looks like. The other party will also be affected by physics, or physics in dreams. And gradually, Linde seems to have figured out the feeling of lucid dreaming, and can even control some things in his dreams, such as turning the magazine on the plane into his own switch, changing the hairstyle of Mr. Wang, a high school student, and even secretly change the scenery outside the window and so on. It's really strange. Did the Roma Empire ever have this kind of technology? The nun held up the lantern and gave up exploring the cabin. If the owner of the dream didn't open those doors, she would be helpless. Although the dream with the lantern could control other people's dreams to a certain extent, if it was forcibly destroyed, I'm afraid there would be nothing behind the cabin door. It's just nothingness that hasn't been loaded yet, and it's likely to wake up the owner of the dream. Looking at these technologies that were suspected to be from the old empire, the nun felt a pity and prepared to execute the order to kill Linde. But soon, Linde, who was still pretending to sleep, heard the nun scream, "Why can't I fully read dreams? No, this is impossible. The goddess's authority should be absolute. What is the problem with this dream?" The nun's gaze rested on Linde, who was pretending to be asleep in his dream. When Linde saw that he was suspected of being exposed and confirmed his control over the dream, he no longer concealed it. He stood up slowly and asked, "What? Don't you introduce yourself first when you arrive at someone else's house?" During the conversation, the venue had changed from the cabin to an open space. Seeing that Linde was still awake in his dream, the nun calmed down and actually introduced herself to Linde. "I am Bernice, the lamp-bearing nun of the Church of the Goddess of Light. This is my first meeting. I am a descendant of the Empire." Linde shook his head, "I am not a descendant of the Empire." Bernice smiled and said, "We originally thought that the descendant of the Empire was just an identity fabricated by the bard for you, but from the dream just now, it seems that you are indeed a real descendant of the Empire. You don't look like the nuns from the Church of the Goddess of Light either." Linde took a look at Bernice. Although the nun's uniform was similar, it was slightly different. The design seemed to be more unrestrained. "No, we are the Orthodox members of the Church of the Goddess of Light, and those who are sitting in the Holy See today are the heretics. But outsiders now generally call us Lantern Dreamland and label us as a cult." Hearing this, Linde was speechless. Isn't it a cult that kills people in his dream? Which decent church would do such a thing? Ignoring Linde's expression, the nun said directly, "Since you can stay awake in your dreams, that would be great. For some reasons, we are very curious about the technology of the old empire. If you can stay awake in your dreams, we will be grateful to you for showing more of the technology of the old empire. So, I showed it to you, do you still want to kill me? Killing you is the decision of the superiors. The details will be left to the superiors after I record these techniques." Very laborious answer. What if I say no? You don't have the right to say no. At some point, a chair appeared behind Bernice, and the nun holding the lantern sat down. "Although we cannot fully gain access to your dreams, we can still manipulate your dreams. In dreams, the most important thing is imagination. It can be said that as long as you have seen and roughly understood the principles of magic and technology, you can use it in dreams. Can be cast at will. Linde's eyes lit up. Doesn't that mean he can conduct experiments in dreams? Thinking of this, Linde immediately created a computer in front of him and input the spell model that was being dismantled on the territory into it, but Linde immediately felt his brain on fire in a physical sense. It seems that even in a dream, if you are not good at mathematics, you still can't do it. Maybe those fancy special effects can be cast infinitely without building a spell model or using magic power, but the real calculation still consumes computing power, but this still makes Linde Sheng came up with many ideas. Seeing that Linde didn't know what he was messing with, Bernice continued, don't think that the technology of the old empire can save you. All of us in Lantern Dreamland have been trained to use the high-level magic we have seen in dreams. Some adults can even use super-level spells. Not only that, we have also seen the goddess's kingdom in prayer, and can materialize the goddess's kingdom in dreams, even if you have lived from the old empire to the present. No one can compete with us in dreams. People cannot imagine what they have not seen, but what we have seen far exceeds the imagination of the world. Bernice, who said this, was extremely proud and seemed to have a winning chance. Linde, on the other hand, looked at the opponent with a look like a fool. With such a convenient and powerful dream ability, the opponent only used it to kill people. It was such a waste of natural resources. No wonder the technology tree of this world is so crooked. Chapter 79. Perhaps in order to increase her momentum, Bernice gently shook the lantern in her hand, and the conversation venue turned into a solemn, huge church wrapped in light. The huge goddess statue looks down at the people with a compassionate expression, making people have the urge to kneel down and worship. Bernice held up the lantern in her hand and said, the goddess's authority is absolute. All other gods in the world are false gods. Only the goddess is the only true god. This is the so-called doctrine of the lantern dream. It is crazy and extreme, and it directly triggered the war of faith in the first place. Descendants of the empire, this is your final warning. If you don't want to be annihilated in a dream like Augustine III, just show the old empire technology you know. Maybe our Lord Bishop will be kind enough to let you live. Linde tried it and found that his control over the dream was not affected, so he asked, are you sure? Of course, we now need the technology of the old empire to solve some mysteries for us. Seeing that Linde seemed ready to cooperate, Bernice lowered her hands, and the black mist surging around her gradually faded into nothingness. You seem to be interested in the sky. Linde was not in a hurry, but continued to chat with the other party. Bernice nodded and said, every professional knows that the closer to the sky, the closer to the secrets and knowledge, so the mages will build towers crazily in an attempt to get close to the sky. But the farther away from the ground, the thinner the magic power, and the more difficult it is to use magic. Therefore, except for the giant dragons, no race can fly freely in the sky like the technology in your previous dream. Oh, that's it. After listening to Bernice's explanation, Linde nodded and said with a smile, then let me show you our technology to reach the sky. Hearing what Linde said, Bernice showed a look of ecstasy on her face and asked, is it the same technology as before? What previous technology? It's more exciting than the previous technology, and it can also teach you to reach the real sky. The real heaven. Just when Bernice was still thinking about the meaning of this word, the surrounding environment suddenly changed, and Bernice found herself standing in a small and strange room. The room is filled with strange metal equipment and the light is dark, but the outside scene can be seen from the window. Moreover, Linde also opened a few more windows in this room, which made it easier for Bernice to observe the surrounding situation. There were many strangely dressed people busy outside. Is this the old empire? Bernice turned to ask Linde, but found that Linde had disappeared at this time. Bernice grinned, but she did not expect that this descendant of the old empire was quite immersive. At this time, an emotionless announcement sounded. Countdown to launch begins. The pedestrian bridge is withdrawn. The warehouse door is closed. Connecting electromagnetic catapult. The electromagnetic ejection system is connected. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Bernice suddenly had a bad feeling in her heart. Emission. With the roar of the ignition, Bernice suddenly felt a huge push from the soles of her feet. At the same time, the weight on her body continued to increase, and became heavier and heavier, as if there were several people pressing on her at the same time. Every place is average. The feeling of dizziness and vomiting came over immediately. If she were not in a dream, Bernice felt that she would faint immediately. Struggling to lie down by the window, Bernice found that the scenery on the ground was shrinking rapidly, and the endless city turned into a blurry pattern. There was no doubt that she was flying high into the sky at an extremely fast speed. Seeing strange rooms up and down around her, Bernice realized what kind of building she was in. The size of the complete room has exceeded Bernice's imagination, and it is heading straight into the sky along the track. The seemingly endless vertical tracks outside that lead directly to the sky are like leading to the endless void, which makes Bernice feel extremely scared. There is also the seemingly endless city in the sky outside the window, which is completely beyond the technical scope of the old empire. Under Linde's control, the space elevator soon surpassed the stratosphere and extended toward the higher sky. If the previous scenery made Bernice feel fear and curiosity at the same time, now there was only fear for Bernice. This has exceeded the legendary flying height of the dragon, and going higher will reach the kingdom of the gods in the scriptures. For Bernice, the subsequent heights are completely unknown world. Tower of Babel, this word suddenly appeared in Bernice's mind. According to legend, it is a tower that connects the world of gods and the human world with no end in sight. Did the descendants of that empire actually reach the Tower of Babel? But isn't the Tower of Babel a product of the Golden Age? It should have been a complete legend during the Old Empire. As the room where Bernice was located continued to pass through the ring of the space elevator in the sky, Bernice saw the huge blue world below her, and the feeling of weightlessness was slowly coming over her. The boundless black sky around her made Bernice feel unprecedented depression, fear, and madness. Is this the world above the sky? Impossible, not to mention that Linde is a descendant of the Old Empire. Even the group of bards who lived in the Old Empire have probably never seen such a scene. But according to legend, isn't there a divine kingdom of goddesses above the sky? Bernice looked up, and just then the cold announcement sounded again. Identity verification passed and allowed to pass through the material transfer area. Welcome to the A7 docking area of A the Ark International Space Station. Happy work. Bernice saw the circular goddess kingdom. There are even many white angels working around the kingdom of God, although those angels have no wings. For a moment, Bernice felt her own insignificance. Compared with the real kingdom of God, the kingdom of God imagined in her prayers was like a firefly or a bright moon, like a joke. This made Bernice go crazy and knelt down to pray in a weightless environment. The strong shock made Bernice completely forget that she was in someone else's dream. In an instant, the scene changed and turned into a scene in a space station. The huge donut-shaped International Space Station could be seen outside the window of this space station. Linde slightly changed the gravity, causing Bernice to fall directly in mid-air. How do you feel? Have you learned anything? Linde, who reappeared, looked at Bernice, whose expression had become distorted, with a smile. Although the details cannot be restored, Linde still tried his best to simulate the space elevator. You are not a descendant of the Empire at all. Bernice lay on the ground and yelled at Linde crazily. I already told you I wasn't. Linde rolled his eyes speechlessly. He had been talking for so long, but in the end only Reina believed that he was really not. You are an old human from the Golden Age. Ah. This is something strange. Linde wondered if Bernice had some strange misunderstanding about the space elevator. It must be true. Only humans in the Golden Age can use the Tower of Babel to reach the kingdom of God. The more Bernice thought about it, the more she was right. Even the previous dreams on the plane had a technological level far beyond that of the Old Empire. The space elevator exceeded the limits of Bernice's imagination. Except for the Golden Age in ancient history, other eras it is simply impossible to have such a level of technology. It must be like this. Only humans in the Golden Age have seen this kind of thing. Only humans in the Golden Age can outline the goddess kingdom. Bernice grabbed her hair, her pupils were bloodshot, and she knelt respectfully toward the International Space Station outside the window. Linde didn't expect the effect to be so good. Sure enough, the space elevator is too exciting for people of this era. But now is not the time to talk about this. Linde still has many questions to ask the other party about dreams. But in an instant, Bernice, who was somewhat crazy, hugged the lantern in her arms tightly and left the dreamland wrapped in black mist. Around the camp in Faison town, a Bernice wearing a slit nun's uniform was running wildly. The gentle light emitted by the lantern in her hand could not calm Bernice down. At this time, Lucanus in costume blocked Bernice's way. How, my king, are his dreams wonderful? But Lucanus soon discovered something was wrong. Bernice in front of him looked dull, her hair was messy, and her eyes were filled with madness and terror. Seeing Lucanus, Bernice laughed loudly, ha 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 ha, your king is not a descendant of the Old Empire at all. Lucanus was not angry and asked, is this important? I haven't even investigated it myself, but as long as I say that my king is, then he is. It's very important, it's very important. Bernice laughed loudly when she saw Lucanus's reaction, you bards are nothing more than that. It really made me laugh to death. Thousands of years are not worth mentioning in the face of God's scale. You are following us now. It's not too late to believe in the goddess. Madman. Although Lucanus was very curious about what the other party saw in the king's dream, it was obvious that the other party saw something important, but he would never tell it. At the same time, Linde woke up from his dream and thought about what happened in the dream. The other party mentioned that he was the orthodox light goddess cult, so he had to ask Isa and Flora, but now there are tons of things to deal with, and judging from the appearance of the other party, he probably won't dare to do anything again in the short term. He can only take one step at a time and wait and see. After washing up, the sky also turned white. Linde, who had just stepped out of the tent, happened to meet Reina who was about to go out for morning exercise. What's wrong, brother, why did you get up so early today? Reina looked at Linde who had just gotten up curiously. What did you just call me? Linde asked as he grabbed Reina's hand reflexively. Brother, don't you like it? Reina immediately retracted her hand with a blushing face. Feeling comfortable, Linde sighed while taking a greedy breath of morning air. Chapter 80. Jim was pulled out by his own mother. Even though he was locked in his room every day, Jim still heard the news of the Evans family's defeat. Not only that, his father Weskier was directly captured, and several brothers were also killed or wounded in the melee. Now the entire Evans family is in chaos. The elders in the family have given countless money to the Grey Collar, but nothing has happened. When the boots did not hit the ground, everyone was in panic. No one knew where the Evans family would go from here. The situation in the Northern Territory is completely different from before. After losing Grand Duke Lars, the official talker, the entire Northern Territory has returned to the chaotic era of aristocratic separatism. Although there are rules from the royal capital, there are not many, especially it was after the deployment from the king retracted back to the central zone. The winner takes all, which is why Weskier and other nobles couldn't wait to conquer the grey collars. But now the Evans family has become the one being eaten. Jim, who had been locked in his room, was pulled from the room to the reception hall by his mother. At this time, Jim finally discovered that the boot that had been hanging over the heads of the Weskier family was about to fall. On both sides of the hall were neatly lined up the white knights of the Lars family, as well as many soldiers holding strange fire sticks. This was an absolutely violent organization, representing the days when nobles could negotiate peacefully and pay fines. There is no going back. The former grey and white collar lord, Linde, was sitting on a high platform with his legs crossed, looking down at everyone with his lowered eyes. Temperament and Jim are more restrained when seen by grey collar workers. His face is neither cold nor friendly, but has a touch of majesty. After quietly observing the surroundings, Jim discovered that not only other members of the Evans family were present, but also many nobles from the surrounding areas. These are the noble families who followed their father Weskier on the expedition. In the past, these people fought hard for a good position in the army, but now they are all kneeling before the grey and white-collared lords equally. But the bard who had been praising him so much before the expedition was now standing humbly behind Linde. Jim, who has done business with many people, knows that now the bard is no longer as flattering as he was when he was around his father, but has corrected his position and appears completely as a servant. As if to confirm that everyone was present, Linde took the document handed over by the bard, and after comparing it with the document in his hand, stood up. I have two documents here. One is the results of the bard's investigation of you, and the other is the results of my clerk's visit and investigation. In order not to accuse you unjustly, I will only select the parts that are consistent between the two investigations and judge you with reference to the northern regulations originally promulgated by the Lars family and the laws of the kingdom. Do you have any objections? After Linde finished speaking, most of the nobles in the audience were still shrinking down in fear, but a few who were bolder raised their heads and said to Linde, Lord, the Northern Territory regulations have actually been abandoned for many years. There are many rules that our nobles no longer abide by. If you strictly follow the regulations in the north, you may lose many of your loyal allies. I'm not denying your authority, but this northern border regulation should be relaxed. No noble will really abide by the regulations of the northern border, because this is the law used by the Lars family when they opened up and guarded the northern border and drove the demons into the eternal frozen soil. It was the most powerful law of the Lars family. Period. The laws enforced also evolved from military law. Although it was continuously relaxed after subsequent revisions, it was still a harsh law in the eyes of these nobles. Even the Lars family themselves did not abide by the northern regulations in the future. Linde did not answer, and occasionally raised his eyes to look at Lucanus behind him. Lucanus understood it and walked forward and said in a measured tone, Barton Wordsworth, 34 years old, the younger brother of the sixth head of the Wordsworth family, and his brother murdered the previous head of the family. Oh, you took the opportunity to rob your sister-in-law and invade your brother's territory when your brother died in the battle. I didn't expect you to have the time to do these things. Linde interrupted Lucanus' gossip and said, keep reading. Lucanus also immediately retracted his thoughts and continued to list Barton's crimes one by one, including illegal occupation of other people's territory, adultery within the clan, abuse of power, illegal taxation and exploitation of farmers, and taking advantage of the chaos to plunder other nobles. If these crimes were normal, they would usually be left to the clan to deal with, or they could just turn a blind eye and pretend they didn't see it. After all, no matter which noble's butt was clean, it was very common for everyone to help each other wipe it. Let's deal with it according to the law. After Linde said this, two Lars knights dragged Barton out. Wait a minute, Lord, I know where our family's treasures are buried. My brother still has hidden gold shield coins and magic stones, and our family still has them. Barton was dragged out amidst such wailing. All the nobles present were too frightened to raise their heads, recalling all the potentially illegal things they had done. But Jim somewhat approved of Linde's approach. Such scum among the nobles should have been dealt with long ago. It is because of these insects in the north that it continues to decline. How can you be with such insects? Can you govern the northern border well? Linde was not interested in Barton's nonsense, but sat down directly and said to Lucanus, continue. Soon, one noble after another was dragged out by the knights. According to the regulations of the north and the laws of the kingdom, those who committed serious crimes were directly dragged to trial, those who did not commit such serious crimes were dragged away to mine, and those who did not commit crimes were dragged away. The nobles have not appeared yet. Only some nobles who had too little power and small territories and could not do any heinous things survived and paid fines to survive. No nobles resisted, because for some reason, the transfer of power between Linde and Lars was extremely smooth. Even the internal fighting imagined by these nobles did not happen. The Lars family chose to completely trust Linde and directly lifted Linde to the position of the head of the family. No noble said it was unfair, because all of Linde's judgments were carried out in accordance with the regulations of the Northern Territory. Although the execution was a bit strict, even if the lawsuit was brought to the royal capital, it was still Linde's fault. The only unreasonable thing was, it was Linde who deposed the immunity of all nobles. Of course, there were a few points along the way where Linde felt that the sentence was lenient. After all, although the northern regulations were strict, they were essentially a law issued by the nobles, and the bias was still obvious. Linde modified these places on the spot, but when faced with these offending nobles, he still judged them according to the old law first. If you do it again in the future, you will be settled together with the previous things. Those nobles who were lucky enough to survive said they would never do it again, and they almost came to lick Linde's boots. Chapter 81. Just when Jim was thinking about the deeper meaning of these places modified by Linde, he heard Lucanus finally read his name. Surprisingly, the Jim reported by Lucanus is generally a good person who cares about the people and does good deeds. After all, Jim has little influence in the Evans family, and he works hard with the lower-level businessmen every day, which is relatively good. Being philanthropic, this suddenly made Jim feel like he stood out from the crowd compared to the previous abstract stuff. Linde was impressed by the name, and after searching around the crowd, he said to Jim, "Raise your head." Jim looked up and met Linde's eyes. "Do you still think that I am the true aristocrat?" Probably because he had just decided the life and death of too many people, Linde even had a faint murderous aura when he spoke now. Jim was not afraid and replied, "This is natural. We should act in accordance with the law. It is the reason why the Lars family was so powerful in the first place. I also think that nobles should not have the so-called immunity." Linde nodded, "I will send someone to manage the Evans family's territory later, and you will be his deputy." Hearing this, Jim's mother was immediately excited, but Jim just saluted proudly to show that he understood. Seeing this scene, other nobles also breathed a sigh of relief. Sure enough, the grey and white collars had annexed so much territory in one go. Even with the help of Lars people, they still needed talents to help manage it. Moreover, Jim was still the youngest son of Weskir, the chief culprit of this war, but Linde was ready to use it without any worries, and went down with Jim to meet his father and several brothers without any more charges, which showed that Linde was true. Act in accordance with the law and only liquidate noble individuals, not harming their families. Thinking of this, many nobles secretly looked at the most honest, or usually least favored, juniors in the family. But after Jim saluted, he continued to ask, "Lord, do you mean to let me inherit my father's title in the future?" Linde shook his head, "No, the titles of all of you will not change for the time being, but from now on, the nobles will not have the power to manage the fiefs. All fiefs will be under the jurisdiction of the officials sent by me." Afraid that these nobles would not understand, Linde continued, "As long as you are obedient, I will not, and I am too lazy to deprive you of your so-called glory, but from now on, all titles are just honorary titles and will no longer have any power. If you want power, you must pass the exam and become my official." Upon hearing this, some nobles immediately stood up and objected, "Sir, without us, who will help you take care of those fiefdoms? With all due respect, the officials you sent through the exam have no knowledge of the territory as well as we nobles. Famous family, so I suggest that you directly let us nobles continue to manage their respective territories, or continue to NFF, we nobles will become your most solid support." Linde did not reply directly, but asked, "What is your title?" The nobleman replied proudly, "Sir, like you, I am a viscount." "Then you are not now. In theory, most of the nobles in the north are Lars's vassals." In theory, Linde, as the patriarch, does have this power, but no one expected that Linde would deprive the other party of his title so ruthlessly. Ignoring the subsequent wailing of the noble, Linde continued, "Don't think that I don't know what you are thinking, but I regret to tell you that even if some of you pass the exam, you must start from the grassroots level, and you will not know how to do it. You will be assigned to your original territory." Jim just considered the special nature of the Evans family. There must be someone who understands this huge family to help my officials. When Jim becomes a formal official, he will also leave the territory of the Evans family. Do you understand? All the nobles were silent and did not dare to say anything, and some even planned to flee to the other side to join Doug Lars. Although Linde said that he would save face for these nobles, in the eyes of these nobles, Linde who gave up enfeoffment, he completely pressed the past glory of the nobles to the ground and rubbed it repeatedly, and even kneaded it twice to try to change this glory into his shape. However, there are also many nobles who are a little excited, especially those who are unhappy in their own families. Many smart people can understand after careful consideration that although Linde gave up continuing to NFF, in the so-called examination, in today's educational environment, nobles who have been educated since childhood have an advantage anyway. In other words, although Linde has now given ordinary people a channel for promotion, they still can only rely on these nobles to govern the place. Moreover, nobles who had no possibility of rising to the top can pass the exam and test the candidates who were ahead of them. Separating the title and power of a nobleman means that no matter how high your status was, it is just an empty shelf. Only through constant competition can you obtain power. Even if you are good enough, you can completely obtain power beyond the family title. What title will be used by you then? Is it important? Especially Jim, when he learned that he would be transferred away from the Evans family's territory in the future, not only did he have no objection, he was even very excited. By the time all the nobles were counted, it was already approaching dusk. When Jim walked out of the reception hall, he instantly felt that the sea and the sky were vast, and the time had finally come to realize his ambitions. Just as Jim was thinking about his future plans, he saw that the nobles who had committed serious crimes were still being judged on the important high platform of the territory. Jim, who was a little curious, leaned over. After all, although there were many nobles, they should have been killed long ago. After getting closer, Jim discovered that these nobles were being led to the guillotine, and the executioner would read the crimes of these nobles before their death, and also introduce the relevant regulations. This reminded Jim of the time when he came to Grey White Collar to discuss resuming the pharmacy business with Linde. This was how the bandits at that time were executed in Grey White Collar. Because the crimes of these nobles were so numerous that the execution time was delayed for a long time. At this time, a civilian saw Jim watching and immediately stepped forward to say hello. "Master Jim, I knew you were fine. When those officials came, we all tried our best to say good things to you, Master. We told you all the things you usually do to help us. The new lord didn't embarrass you, right? Seeing the enthusiasm of the people around him, Jim was a little overwhelmed for a moment and could only nod his head. Master Jim, I see that all those noble gentlemen have been killed, and the people next to them are still talking about why they were killed. Then if we encounter those situations in the future, can we let those people come and punish the noble gentlemen who bullied us? Killed too. After hearing this sentence, Jim understood why Linde did this. Even if ordinary people don't know what the specific laws are, they must at least have these concepts so that these ordinary people will encounter similar situations in the future. At least dare to file a lawsuit. At this time, Linde lay down on the chair with some exhaustion. The nobles below had basically completed the trial and returned to their respective homes. The cleaning of the largest territory under their control was completed. In the future, other areas only need to follow this process. For now, the most important thing is to resume production. In history, there are many examples of successful battles, but because they were unable to resume production, there was no follow-up, and they were unable to defend and lost their country. Therefore, in the following period, Linde plans to use planned production for management and control, and must first restore productivity as quickly as possible. The matter of the lantern dream has not yet been dealt with. Most of the relevant information comes from Lucanus, but Linde does not fully trust Lucanus yet. Linde must find other people to investigate the information provided. Looking at the blood-stained sunset outside the window, Linde, who had been a judge for a day, clearly felt the alienation of power from people. Just like when he saw Lena's two younger brothers before, his first thought was to consolidate his power. Just like killing the opponent. Although it was just a trivial thought, it still frightened Linde. When he first came to this world, Linde still felt that he was a little out of place, but now he is becoming more and more like a local. Linde was afraid that he would because of power, he has become cold and arrogant, and has become a tyrant who has his own way of doing things and is inhumane. At this time, Reina carried a roasted duck and walked through the somewhat messy hall to stand in front of Linde. Thank you, brother, I went to raid Evan's inventory and asked the chef to add a lot of spices to you. Linde subconsciously stood up and took it, and squatted on the high platform with Reina. The two people with the highest status in the Lars family just enjoyed the dinner without any appearance. If there is any improvement, it is the surrounding people. There were more sauces that the attendants silently handed over. Seeing Reina devouring her food, Linde, as usual, began to talk about the situations she encountered today, how to deal with them, and her future plans. Reina also kept echoing, occasionally mentioning the weapons and equipment she recently designed to Linde. While chatting, Linde suddenly laughed. Reina immediately wiped the oil stains from her mouth with her hands and asked doubtfully, "Brother, why are you laughing?" Linde waved his hand, "Nothing." Seeing Reina's relieved expression, Linde suddenly understood the meaning of this peaceful place being my hometown. As long as Reina is still around, I probably won't become such a tyrant. Chapter 82. After the day's visit, ISA returned to the temporary camp. In addition to taking over the territories of these nobles, the grey and white collars now also want to take over the churches in these territories. Although two religious figures, ISA and Flora, are temporarily in charge, Flora's idea was too radical and was suppressed by Linde. Now the nuns at the Cathedral of Our Lady of the Rescue can only help ISA for the time being. This made ISA very confused as to why the sisters who worked together to save the world became like this now. But ISA had never experienced their pain, so she didn't say much. Flora and the others' idea was to directly dissolve all churches, let all believers directly believe in the goddess, and no longer let priests and nuns play the original role of guides, and cancel all the power of the church. And all prayers and masses must be organized and held by the Lord and subordinate officials. Return true faith to the people. Such a radical approach naturally aroused strong opposition from churches everywhere, and even Flora's former fame could not suppress these objections. This is just the one that ISA thinks is the most normal among the reform plans proposed by Flora. Some of the remaining plans were even more radical, so radical that ISA simply did not dare to announce them. At first, Linde was a little unsure after reading through these plans. To be honest, the plans proposed by Flora are too tempting. If they can be implemented, then at least in the western part of the north, the church will be completely under the rule of the Lord, and the Lord's power may even surpass the goddess. In Flora's reform plan, the goddess completely became a clay idol, while the Lord became the spokesperson of faith and the son of the goddess who was appointed by heaven. That's right, the son of the goddess in the literal sense. Linde suspected that those nuns really regarded him as the illegitimate son of the goddess. This was a bit too exciting, and he was directly detained by ISA. Because it was too radical and impossible to implement, Linde did not adopt Flora's plan, but these plans were not without merit. For example, cancelling some unnecessary privileges of the church must be implemented no matter what. Priestess Linde had no interest in bargaining with the group of nuns and priests, but the church school must either build a new school locally to replace it, or the teaching materials and teachers must be replaced. All clergy, like those nobles, only retain their names and cancel their privileges. However, the clergy are still better off than the nobles, because they at least retain the right to carry out religious activities. After being baptized by Flora's radical reform plan, many local churches chose to follow the new, less radical plan that ISA later put together. This is also because the goddess of light is currently weakening, and because of some previous actions, the control of the goddess of light in the north has become weaker and weaker, so some churches have chosen to surrender directly. Of course, the main reason is that the current contraction strategy pursued by the Central Holy See focuses on the reform within the Holy See, and it is difficult to spare the energy to deal with the problems in the north. The western part of the northern territory is vast and sparsely populated, and there are no large regional churches. There is no need to kill a group of nobles first like those nobles. Moreover, Linde did not restrict church personnel from taking the civil service exam, but only stipulated that after passing the exam, they could not preach in public places. Therefore, many church members began to bring their own ideas for the future of their own churches and to increase the Holy See's voice in new territories. The students took the public examination to compete with the nobles. Isa sat down tiredly in the temporary residence, only to find that Flora was discussing something with other nuns. Although the relationship between Isa and these nuns was a little tense because of the religious reform, it was business after all. When Flora saw Isa coming back, she quickly brought Isa into the discussion. It turned out to be something about the lantern dream that Linde had asked about before. Is there actually a cult that claims to be the goddess's orthodoxy? Because she had not become a saint, Isa did not know much about the history of the Holy See. Yes, they did split from the church. Based on what she knew in the report sent by Lucanus, Flora introduced the situation of the lantern dream to Isa. They are the saints who started a war of faith 200 years ago. They claimed that the goddess is the only god and that the other gods are just false gods. Because it was contrary to the ideas of compatibility and fraternity of the goddess, the Holy See at that time cut off from these saints, and because the teachings were too radical, these saints were classified as a kind of cult by all other religions. Isa was stunned when she heard this, but somehow, she actually recognized this twisted teaching in her heart. Perhaps she was too tired from the day's visit, so Isa immediately shook her head to drive these outrageous thoughts out of her mind. But Flora continued, we think it is not impossible. After all, we have only seen the divine son of the goddess, and other gods have never had real records of divine sons descending to earth, only some so-called ones chosen by gods. Saint. Isa, who had just taken a sip of water, almost spat it out. Suddenly she seemed to understand why Flora's reform ideas were so radical. The Lord wanted to contact them, but for some unknown reason, the spies planted by this group of people in some local churches all ran away overnight. Flora said while stroking the ray gun in her hand. Even through the mask, I could feel Flora's pity, and Isa also sighed, knowing that her gentle and kind sister Flora would never come back. At this time, in a solemn church that did not exist in reality, several figures with only visible outlines were forming a circle. Let's start, play the dream experienced by Bernice the lamp keeper. After the outline of the leading nun finished speaking, the surrounding scene immediately changed. Several silhouettes started from the airport, using Bernice's first-person perspective to completely experience Linde's dream. When seeing the huge space station, all the shadows became a little unstable. The silhouette of the leading nun fixed the dream on the huge space station and asked, "Can you switch to a free perspective?" The voice in the void replied, "You can try, but because the places you haven't seen can only be restored through calculation, I'm afraid it will directly consume a lot of brain servants. These are all necessary sacrifices to get closer to the goddess." Understood, changing the free perspective. As the sound in the void fell, the surrounding scene began to change continuously. The silhouette of the nun headed by the leader pulled the progress back to the time before the space elevator took off. She watched it completely from a free perspective, and then pulled the progress back again and observed carefully. Got the lift around the city and the staff. Human beings cannot imagine what they have not seen. The silhouette of the leading nun murmured to herself. They are really remnants of the Golden Age. Several other silhouettes are also constantly watching the majestic city in the distance, but unfortunately, this place on the edge of the dream cannot be completely restored, no matter how many brain servants are sacrificed. Then the assassination plan against Linde will continue. The figure held his head and shook his head, as if he felt that his question was a bit stupid. Since the other party has issued a warning, we can no longer be entangled. After all, we are remnants of the Golden Age, and we need his technology and knowledge. Another silhouette added, careful contact and try to cooperate. If it is a remnant of the Golden Age, maybe. The silhouette of the figure paused. I've really seen the goddess. The dream fell into a brief eerie silence. If you are a remnant of the Golden Age, why don't you stand up and denounce the churches of false gods? A silhouetted figure stood up and asked indignantly. The leader of the nuns, Silhouette, explained, in the Golden Age, the title of goddess was not necessarily the same as it is now. There may not even be a concept of gods at that time. For them, their view of goddesses may be similar to how we view elves today. This is too exaggerated. The silhouettes couldn't help but take a step back, but seeing the majestic city under their feet and the Tower of Babel reaching the sky, they felt that it was not impossible. Of course, all this is just speculation. The Golden Age is too long ago. Even during the Old Empire, the Golden Age was an ancient legend that could not be traced. I will show our sincerity to Linde. It is best if the other party agrees to cooperate. Even if he refuses, we must not provoke the other party. This matter must not be spread. It is forbidden to talk to Linde in private. Contact, that's it, let's break up the meeting first. After the nun silhouette finished speaking, she waved the lantern in her hand, and all the other figures turned into black mist and disappeared, leaving only the nun silhouette in the dream of the Golden Age. The scene changed, and the silhouette of the nun returned the time to the beginning, focusing on the girl who called Linde brother. According to the intelligence, there has never been a similar girl around Linde, which means that she is most likely a relative of Linde in the Golden Age. But why is this girl so similar to the current saint, Lilith Dorian? The nun shook her head in silence, and her dream began to gradually collapse and dissipate. There is just some similarity, but the temperament of Lilith Dorian is too different. Chapter 83. The messenger from the royal capital once again came to this northern territory that made him collapse. In the previous defeat of the coalition forces, the envoy relied on the protection of his loyal servants and luckily survived the shelling and subsequent battles. Because he didn't raise any flags and was dressed very ordinary, no one was chasing him. In addition, he was also a professional, although he was just an inconspicuous low-level professional. Therefore, the envoy from the royal capital was very lucky to not only escape, but also escape safely all the way back to the royal capital. But he didn't expect fate to play tricks on people. When Crane saw that the envoy could run away so well, he simply handed over the appointment of the governor to the envoy who had just escaped. The envoy, who was still sitting in his chair at home, returned to the north without stopping. Needless to say, Doug Lars entertained the envoy with delicious food and drinks, but the envoy was not happy at all. After all, we are going to Faison Town later. Now there is no Faison Town. The downstream Faison Town was directly merged into Grey Collar. When Linde asked Jefferson if he was willing, Jefferson's answer, I have no problem with that. After all, Jefferson swore that he would never sit on the fence again. However, Jefferson also got a big business in sugar and recovery potions, which made other nobles envious. But the town of Faison disappeared from then on. But there is only one voice in the entire western part of the Northern Territory, which is basically the same as the situation in Faison Town. Why don't you see the Patriarch of Lars and the Grey Collar Lord to compensate you? The carriage with the Augustine double-headed lion family emblem was not informed until it entered the western part of the north that Linde was still staying in the Evans family's territory for the time being. This was not surprising. After all, the newly conquered territory was indeed needed some time to digest. And along the way, the envoy saw many nobles fleeing. The envoy stopped many nobles and asked, only to find that they could not stand Linde Roar's harsh punishment and escaped. This made the envoy shake his head repeatedly, although Doug next door. The situation in Lars is not much better. The territory is full of servants and soldiers looting, but there is no such situation of nobles fleeing. But when the envoy entered the city, he discovered that the production in Evans territory had not been affected. Not only that, there are signs recruiting workers everywhere on the street. There seems to be endless work here. People are so busy that no one notices this luxury carriage speeding down the street. This seemed to tell the messenger in the car that the territory would still be running without the nobles. No, it wasn't like they had left the nobles. The envoy had already seen many nobles wearing strange helmets directing their work. The originally arrogant nobles now actually work as supervisors here. It seems that not only the supervisors, but also those familiar faces are rolling up their trousers and shoveling a pile of strange sand. Among them, the envoy even saw an unusually familiar face, Sean Lars. The current lord's brother-in-law was actually teaching the nobles and ordinary people how to work in a place that looked like a construction site. It's no wonder that those nobles are willing to mix with a group of commoners regardless of their image. Even Sean Lars, once the most promising heir of the Lars family and the younger brother of the current lord's only wife, is working in the mud. It is naturally impossible for other people to have opinions. But the envoys who were familiar with the nobles also soon discovered that the nobles who worked with Sean were often unpopular at home, or marginalized people with no hope of inheriting the family. Before the envoy could figure out the relationship, the carriage had already arrived at Linde's location. Linde didn't really want to live in the original mansion of the Evans family, because the mansions of nobles were often full of secret passages and mechanisms, and there might be some messy rooms, so he temporarily bought the unused mansion of a wealthy businessman. The house was lived in. Long time no see, Your Majesty the messenger. Seeing the professional fake smile on Linde's face, the messenger felt a chill go down his spine, and he just begged to never meet Linde again in the future. Viscount Linde Roll, congratulations, the king has decided that you will be the governor of the north. This is the king's personal letter and appointment letter. Linde had actually heard about the appointment of himself as governor, and also knew that Doug Lars on the other side had also received the same appointment. After everyone discussed it, everyone still felt that it would be better to accept this appointment. Because this added a touch of legal rationality to Linde's rule, although it was basically dispensable. After all, Linde ruled in the name of Lars. But no one really wants to be a rebel, especially the old nobles like Lena and Caroline, who still have some of the feudal nobles' loyalty to the emperor in their hearts. Lucanus and Flora were much more radical, and they even wanted Linde to declare his accession to the throne. Both sides are a little too extreme. Linde plans to build a high wall, accumulate food, slowly become king, eat the sugar coating, and hit back with cannonballs. Maybe Linde doesn't need this so-called governorship, but the new nobles working under Linde need it very much, so since the other party has given him a step, Linde is also willing to give it a face. But when Linde actually read the appointment letter and Crane's handwritten letter, he always had a strange feeling. Although Linde didn't know the male protagonist very well, he always felt that he didn't seem like someone who could come up with such a strategy. This kind of balancing both sides while at the same time fighting against each other always feels a bit like the strategy that a certain superpower liked to use in the previous life. Crane even promised that Linde could purchase weapons and equipment from the royal capital through channels. This kind of selling at high prices the weapons and equipment that he eliminated. The money-making model of using old equipment and returning it to fire is very similar. If it were a stupider noble, he might really think that Crane was here to support him, and he would fight Doug Lars with a knife until the last northerner was left. The only unpleasant thing is probably that there is only one fortress between the royal capital and the northern realm. Such a close distance prevents the royal capital from achieving true offshore checks and balances, and it is easy to play with fire and get involved. Probably because of this, the royal capital only appointed 2 governors to facilitate balance. Linde could even use his butt to think that the autographed letter Doug Lars received was probably similar to his own. It contained a bunch of bullshit, and then he started selling the old weapons and equipment of the royal capital. And once either himself or Doug Lars is defeated, the king will immediately appoint one of Doug's two brothers as the new governor. Of course, this kind of gameplay has been played by the ancients for a long time, and it is not a new thing. Linde does not think that the natives are stupid and can't think of similar methods. But it just doesn't feel right. This strange feeling has been lingering in Linde's mind. The opponent's fight is too methodical. Could it be the idea of Euro the time traveler who replaced Isa in the royal capital? Looking at Linde's frown, the messenger asked cautiously, "Your Majesty the Governor." Linde finally came to his senses and signed the appointment letter. The messenger came forward to check and found that it was still the familiar one. Read. Chapter 84. Sean came to the construction site early as usual and guided others to start making cement. This magical cement only requires materials that can be found everywhere, and it doesn't even require a foundation in alchemy. And Sean feels that these cements can be further optimized, and do not require alchemy materials. They only need to change the materials or production methods. Sean feels that the strength of the cement is far from reaching the upper limit. This thing was probably used to build bridges and pave roads in the old empire. When he thought that the products of the old empire were made by his own hands, Sean felt extremely satisfied. This sense of accomplishment was not comparable to learning a few simple spells. Because large-scale road construction was about to begin, it was basically impossible to hide the ingredients of the cement formula, but Linde had no intention of keeping it secret forever. This kind of thing was just to gain a first-mover advantage. Moreover, considering the efficiency of the feudal nobles, Linde suspected that the other party might not react until the cement roads in his territory were laid. People who came to study include ordinary workers and aristocratic children. Although Sean could see that many aristocratic children came to this construction site because they wanted to get close to him, but as his brother-in-law said, as long as the work is done regardless of the heart, as long as they have learned and really performed their production tasks well, so it is not a bad idea to make friends and promote them. In fact, many nobles have discovered that Linde is really short of people. As long as you have a decent personality in the past and work hard enough and reliably now, you can get promoted quickly. Linde's requirements for these nobles are already very low, that is, not to be too abstract. Many nobles put down their status early and started to work at the grassroots level. Instead, they were quickly promoted. Although they were still struggling at the bottom, they had regained some power and could be regarded as senior officials. As for those nobles who were still watching, they saw that those surrenderers were gradually taking away the power that originally belonged to them. There were even some families with little background who were likely to ride on their heads in the future because they worked the hardest. The smell of shit finally urged the more human-like juniors of my family to enter. In fact, most of the nobles are still hedging their bets. Some of them fled to the area ruled by Doug Lars, and some stayed to work with Linde. It's just that many nobles whose foundations have been corrupted can't even launch a descendant who has begun to take shape. They can only watch their former territorial power being divided up by these new nobles. These nobles who became officials through simple examinations, former religious figures, and civilians with excellent results in church schools are forming new interest groups. Looking at these new nobles who were full of enthusiasm and fantasizing about their life after promotion, Sean just nodded and smiled as before. I don't know how many % of the smiles these new nobles who will take office in various places will have left after the brother-in-law's method of passing the examination is revealed. Originally, Linde planned to directly use KPIs and performance to increase the strength of these new nobles who still dreamed of becoming masters. However, after discussing with the great elder of Lars, Linde planned to wait for a while before promulgating this examination method. After all, what if those people see the test method and don't dare to join the trap and take the exam together? You have to trick people into it first. And the content cannot be copied, only certain changes must be made. With the help of the great elder, a test method that is more suitable for the physique of noble babies in this world was released. Because it was in the early stages of starting a business, Linde and the elders deleted some inhumane punishments and added incentives and promotion channels to allow those who are really working to be promoted faster. The performance requirements have also been relaxed a bit, mainly because they are worried that some people will be eager for quick success. Although Linde believes that no matter how relaxed these things are, people who are greedy for success will still use some extraordinary means to achieve performance tasks. Although this different world version of the examination method can be directly used, it is still being revised. Linde needs to add some sunk costs to these officials to prevent them from giving up their jobs after seeing the official test law. But now, the small nobles who are constantly being promoted and the promotion paths are beginning to be relaxed, are like carrots that dangle those nobles to continue to send more people to take the public examination. When the sunk costs are enough, this group of nobles can only work harder to open papers for each other under the examination method. No one wants to give up their lost power again. Linde directly deprived them of their original power, and occasionally gave it back to them from under his fingernails. These nobles still shed tears of gratitude to Linde. Because of this, the big noble families ran away the most, but many poor families were quickly rise. In fact, Linde also wants to really promote some civilians, but the educational foundation in this world is too poor. Most civilian officials still come from grey-collar workers. Even if there are church schools, there are only a few literate people. Linde cannot be like him. At the beginning, in the small grey-collar area, we started to directly promote education with our own efforts. We could only establish promotion channels for civilians first, and then slowly spread them through public schools and missionary schools. By noon, Sean had already taken a rest under the pergola. The sugar water after labor was more delicious than all the wine Sean had drunk before. Ever since Linde became the head of the family, creatures of unknown origin have been constantly contacting Sean, hoping that Sean can stand up and take charge of the overall situation, regain power, become Lars's heir, and rebuild Lars' glory. But Sean didn't reply. He just silently handed the list of these people to his brother-in-law and Colin. Although there was no response from his brother-in-law, Colin now takes his guards to and from various places in the territory every day, and starts to find these unknown creatures one by one according to the list, even better than the bard next to his brother-in-law. Be positive. Sean feels extremely comfortable in his current life. There is no longer any pressure from the heir, and he only needs to think about the things in front of him every day. The management of the Evans territory has begun to get on the right track, and thanks to Jim Evans, the grey-collar officials took over the entire territory very smoothly. And Sean is leaving here soon. After that, Sean plans to study rune science, a new course for grey-collar workers. I heard that as long as you master this subject, you can participate in and create the analysis of the mathematical Olympiad. Sean is very interested in this mathematical Olympiad. I have been curious about the magic circle and magic trigger for a long time. It is precisely because of these two things that the current steel production capacity of grey and white collars is completely surplus. Just relying on grey and white collars is enough to renovate all the equipment of the Lars Knights in the western part of the north. At the same time, Sean also heard that grey and white collar workers were building magic focus arrays and were in urgent need of professionals with outstanding computing capabilities. Sean planned to contribute. Although he didn't know what the specific role would be, Sean believed that his brother-in-law would not be aimless and would definitely it's something very important. Moreover, I heard that my brother-in-law recently planned to promote military reform, but there was strong opposition within the Lars family, so Sean also wanted to go back to help. Sean, who had personally experienced the complete battlefield in the valley, knew that the past wars in which Lars Knights could simply crush them to victory were a thing of the past. If there are still people in the family who are ungrateful, Sean doesn't mind letting those people know why he was once the most promising heir. Chapter 85. At the shooting range, as the target in the distance was burned through, Laurie muttered, flicked the ray gun in his hand and said, "No, although the rate of fire has been increased, the overheating problem is too big. In comparison, it is a bit the gain outweighs the loss." White, the instructor of Winterfell, looked at the ray gun in Laurie's hand and swallowed his saliva. "Want it?" Laurie looked at White with a wicked smile. "Call me brother, and I'll give you my ray gun." White was startled, and he was about to blurt out the words good brother, but he immediately gritted his teeth and lowered his head, as if to warn himself, White, how can you be so depraved? What you are carrying is Lars. The remaining army." But after looking at the burned target in the distance, White couldn't help but reach out his hand. Yolanda on the side couldn't stand it any longer. She didn't know what these two unshaven uncles were so annoyed about, so she simply said, "If you want to use the ray gun, just tell the Lord no. I heard that the grey and white collars are already here. When researching new ray guns, there will always be old ones that can be used. Now it's the governor." Laurie corrected. "And you don't understand, this isn't a ray gun problem, it's a Lars army problem." Yolanda shook her head, a little confused. In her opinion, since the Lord, oh no, the governor is the head of the Lars family, shouldn't the army also serve the governor? What's the problem with this? After all, Yolanda, who was born in Faison Town, lived in a very conservative knight family since she was a child. The Knights of Faison Town also existed as a soy sauce most of the time, so since Jefferson voted for Linde, the Knights of Faison Town have not surprisingly, he was recruited and received the same training as the Grey Collar First Army. Although it is very hard, for most of the knights who just hold pitchforks and are not real knights, the treatment is far better than before. Of course, some people who do not meet the standards have quit the knights, but after all, the number is not high. Many, these people can only be said to have returned to normal life and devoted themselves to great construction. But Lars's remaining army in Winter Castle is different. Originally, the soldiers and civilians in Winter Castle were integrated without separation. Now, even with the help of Sean and the Great Elder, a large number of people who are just a few are eliminated, and the remaining the army also numbered in the thousands. The size has completely exceeded the grey and white collar army. If one is not handled well, it is easy to lead the grey-white collar army astray. Not to mention that Lars' remaining army is completely a feudal army. Although Lars's military discipline was relatively strict, and the remaining army was from Winterfort, its military pay was not deducted on weekdays, so there was no bad habit of looting, and it was able to withstand Doug Lars's coalition attack at that time. But compared with the armies of the nobles, they were only beginning to take shape. The fact that there is no bad habit of looting as a whole does not mean that individuals do not have it. The old officer class, with knights as the main body and retinues as supplements, has no binding force on the subordinate soldiers. Soldier robbery is even an unwritten rule in this world. Nowadays, the military discipline of grey-collar workers not only requires daily drills, but also prohibits looting. If you steal a fellow's chicken, you must pay compensation and apologize. Many soldiers of Winterfort feel that their service as soldiers was in vain. It is even more difficult to get them to abide by the 3 major disciplines and the 8 points of attention. But the real problem lies with the knightly class in the army. Because Laurie was originally a border veteran, he took the original veteran team to visit the Winterfort army and found that these soldiers did not want to abide by discipline. After all, the soldiers' welfare benefits were very high, which made them have these bad habits. All the veterans felt a little embarrassed to go out to rob again. Moreover, no one in the grey-collar workers regarded the soldiers as dirt legs. When the citizens saw the soldiers wearing medals on their chests, they respected them from the bottom of their hearts, which made the young soldiers envious. You must know that even the Knight Master has never been so respected, and those medals are not only obtained by knights and nobles. The hairless little kid named Darcy was awarded the Bronze Marksmanship Medal for his shooting skills, and his nostrils turned toward the sky when he walked on the road. Many young soldiers were unconvinced and felt that if they had such equipment, they would kill more enemies than their opponents. The real problem lies with those knight classes. After all, the newly born officers have completely replaced the ecological position of the knight class. Originally, Linde's plan was to disrupt all the soldiers of Winter Castle and then lead them by officers with grey-collar backgrounds. If that was not enough, he would start from the first place. Promote soldiers to become officers in the army. However, under the leadership and induction of these knights, it is often difficult for officers from ordinary people to truly control the army. White didn't want the troops belonging to Lars to change their surname to Roar. Even if he saw the grey-white collar armament, he was still reluctant to accept it. Some of the thoughts of the feudal knights were beyond the comprehension of Linde. After the negotiations were fruitless, White followed Lowry to the latest equipment testing site. In the site, there was a knight wearing full plate armor with a backpack on his back. There was a ray gun and a percussion gun on the backpack, and there is also a sharp blade fixed on both sides of the armor. The soldiers in the field used the ray gun to fire molten rays continuously at the tempered target. After the rapid shooting ended and the barrel began to smoke, the soldier inserted the molten rays back into the slot on the side of the backpack. The condensation on the slot, the mathematical Olympiad array, was activated and the temperature began to cool down. Then the soldier took advantage of this gap and took out the firing gun to fire continuously. Although the rate of fire was not as good as the molten ray, the power was not inferior. It was even more effective when the target did not have strengthening runes and could directly break through against the magic barrier. Finally, the soldier demonstrated the hand blade on the gauntlet. As the soldier made a fist-clenching motion, the contracted hand blade on the gauntlet ejected, and the edge of the hand blade began to appear a burnt red color. The armor hand blade on the other side made the roar of a chainsaw. No matter which side of the hand blade looks like cutting iron, White is envious. Laurie was about to take this opportunity to brag with the previous night, but suddenly he heard a sound that made Laurie's hair stand on end. Laurie. This sound is like going back to when you were a child and missed dinner time because of fun, and your mother called you by your full name when you came home. A woman who looked like a maid walked over quickly. You just used the budget of the Lord, the governor, to do this? Didn't I already warn you not to make it into what you call a hand blade? Replacement is troublesome and repair is even more troublesome. The governor has clearly said that it is better to make it into an ordinary sword. Just the sword style. Hearing this voice, everyone in Laurie dwarfed and immediately ran forward to please him. Master Lila, doesn't this mean that true knowledge comes from practice? I don't want to know if this armored hand blade is useful until I try it. These are all normal adjustments, normal adjustments. It's really not you who wants to be a toy to play with. Lila held the report in her hand and glanced sideways at Laurie. That's not true. Laurie immediately stood at attention. Then tell me, what have you tried? Lila lowered her eyes, no longer looking at Laurie, but looked at the experimental report in her hand. At least not with a chain sword. Let alone mounting it on an armor. Even if it is used as a sword, it is very troublesome to maintain. The cost and damage rate are frighteningly high. If you want to increase stability, you must increase your body shape. Unlike melting, the cutting sword is efficient and easy to use. The sword module can be replaced at any time. It perfectly meets the modular requirements of the Lord, but only. Lila's report has almost reached the end. It's just that if you want to use it repeatedly, it will be a little difficult, and the material cost will be a little more. Laurie made a vague gesture, but Lila sighed deeply after reading the report. Forget about using it repeatedly. Use disposable materials. The territory cannot afford the alchemy materials that can withstand repeated melting and cutting of the magic circle. Laurie nodded and continued, although chain swords are more troublesome to maintain, the nuns seem to like them very much, and they have more advantages than melting swords in some situations. Is it possible to produce some specifically for the nuns to use? Lila said while scribbling on the report. The governor pays for the nun army himself, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, then the armaments matter is settled like that. I'll go find the governor to finalize it. At least it's within the budget, so it should be fine. After speaking, Lila raised her head and glanced at White. White was a little surprised. Although Laurie was a little bit arrogant, he was currently the actual person in charge of the grey-collar army. Why was he nodding and bowing to a figure who looked like a maid? Lars men would not bow down to women. Thinking of this, White took a step forward and met Lila's eyes, preparing to show Laurie what it means to be a real man. He has the aura of looking at you. When Lowry saw this, he immediately pulled White and whispered in White's ear, she is in charge of military expenditures. Humph, so what about those in charge of military expenditures? We, the Knights of Lars, don't fight for money. But before White and Laurie could finish their whispers, Lila said directly, report the military expenditures and weapons status of your Winterford army. The governor said that your equipment and weapons should be updated. Upon hearing this, White's momentum immediately shrunk in the middle of standing up, and his height shrank to the same height as Laurie. Okay sister. Chapter 86. At night, in the grey-collar governor's mansion, Raina was lying on the bed and gently stroking the brand new melting sword. It is said to be the governor's residence, but in fact it is just a slightly larger residence. It is a house that has been under construction for a long time and has been slightly renovated. After all, Even if Linde still wants to live in a tent, the Lars family and his men will not allow it. The melting sword in Lena's hand is different from the disposable sword blade Lori and the others are about to get, but a real magic blade. It is more like a crystallization in the laboratory than a product of industrialization. The smooth shape of the single-edged sword coupled with the dark blade shimmering with cold light. Even if you remove the hilt and the runes on the sword, you can see that this is a sword that can cut iron as well as mud. After pulling the trigger on the sword hilt, the runes on the sword began to emit a faint fluorescence, but it was quickly covered up by the flash of heat. Different from mass-produced melt-cutting swords, the blade of this sword is not reddish-red after activation, but dark red. This is due to the nature of the composite fine iron of the sword body. Not only is the temperature sufficient, but it is also not will cause damage to the blade. Do you like it? After asking this question, Linde wanted to try it himself. However, although this sword was more effective, it was also heavier and could not be used by ordinary people. Well, I didn't expect you to actually do it, brother. These are just the ideal products that Rena considered in her early design. Unexpectedly, Linde actually realized this ideal product. Of course, it is not fully realized, and the weight is much heavier than expected. And the process of implementation is also difficult. Not to mention how long this composite material will be tested, the energy supply problem has troubled Lisha for a long time. After all, the melting sword is not a ray gun, and it is much more difficult to continuously supply energy than to shoot one shot and run away. Fortunately, the transmission and energy supply of magic power are also the main topics of territory research now. When there is a breakthrough in the topic, the energy supply problem is naturally solved. Original color sand can store much more magic power than magic stone in the same space, so it naturally has the potential to be used as a magic battery. However, because the isolation effect is too strong, it is difficult to continuously inject magic power into the original color sand. It is generally used for some. It is a toy that the caster usually exercises, or a backup force at critical moments. The original color sand itself also needs to be remelted at high temperature to carve the rune array. This is why the original color sand has not been able to replace magic stone as the main energy storage method. But now at least remelting the chain is not a problem. The steel production capacity of grey and white collar workers has long been oversupplied, and they have even begun to consider exporting. It is not difficult to use part of the production capacity to melt the original color sand. The remaining difficulty is mainly how to store magic power in the original color sand. What Linde wants is not the kind of rich and willful high-level professionals who use raw sand as a toy for practice and occasionally inject magic power, but to mass-produce raw sand magic batteries in batches. In the end, under great pressure, Linde spent a large sum of money to build a magic focusing array. Although it has not yet been built, judging from the primary color sand magic battery used in this melting sword, this idea is feasible. With the energy supply equipment, the research pressure on the power mechanism will be much less. You only need to consider which magic is the most efficient as the initial power. The chain sword is constantly changing the magic as the initial power for experiments. The next thing is to keep burning money. Listening to Linde complaining about the cost of research progress, Rena took out a bunch of keys from her arms and stuffed them into Linde's hands. Brother, this is my little treasury. If it doesn't work, just use it first. Whether it is expanding the army or researching and producing, these all require money. In addition, Linde has also kept the taxes of the new territory to a minimum, so Rena has long sensed that the territory is now unable to make ends meet. No need, there is no problem in maintaining the basic operation of the territory now. As long as industrialization is started, the current efforts will be worth it. Linde is not lying. All the resources of Winter Castle are now allocated by Linde. The family property of that group of nobles can still be used for a long time, and the remaining nobles will not be without profit if they squeeze it. Although the taxes are low, but it's actually just back to normal. In addition, due to the rule of the Champagne nobles, commerce in the western part of the Northern Territory was relatively prosperous, and due to the rapid recovery of production, commercial tax revenue was even higher than before after the change to unified taxation. Linde pushed the key back into Rena's hand and talked about future plans after industrialization. Although Rena didn't seem to understand, she kept nodding. As Rena said before, she would believe whatever Linde said. Rena was probably the only one in the entire territory who truly believed that Linde was not a descendant of the old empire. Linde, who realized that he was gradually starting to talk too much, glanced at Rena who was already lying on the bed and then remembered that he was here to report to Rena about the situation in the territory today. Although Archduke Lars is dead, Linde no longer has to pretend to talk to Lena about the details of the territory, but this has become a habit. If he doesn't do this, Linde will feel uneasy. Lena will can't sleep either. However, this was the first time that Linde reported in Rena's room. Before, he had been in the Lord's tent, and Rena fell asleep while chatting. After dragging the topic back, Linde began to talk about the main issue in the territory, which is military reform. By the way, he also talked about the current production situation in the territory. It won't be long before cement roads can connect most of the western part of the northern border area. The transportation efficiency will be much higher by then, and the materials ordered by Shuajin Merchant Alliance can also reach grey and white collar workers faster. After talking about today's work, Linde found that Rena was not asleep yet. Perhaps it was because he was not in a large tent with air leakage, but in the room. Linde felt that he could smell the scent of Rena's soap locust beside the bed. Brother, I seem to know what the problem is with the army. Just when Linde was curious about what suggestions Rena would have, he found that he had met Rena's eyes unknowingly. Rena took Linde's hand and said, "Don't leave, okay?" Rena's sleep state was very poor, and she fell asleep several times during the night before clinging to Linde's body, so the two of them discussed the issue of transmitting magic power to the primary color sand through the magic focusing array several times during the night. When it was time to get up in the morning, the dazed Reina unconsciously hooked Linde with her legs, like a kitten who was afraid of being abandoned and insecure, so that both Linde and Reina were rare. Got up late. Looking at Reina sleeping soundly next to him, giggling while sleeping, it was really difficult for Linde to connect with the affectionate Reina last night, but this brother would not be able to do it in the future. When Reina finally got up and arranged her hair in front of the almost unused dressing table, Linde ordered the maid waiting outside the door. It turns out that my room should be converted into a study, so there is no need to continue decorating it. As for the issue of the military system, Linde issued a statement according to Lena's suggestion last night, establishing Lena's status as the top leader of the army. Although it was only a false position, the real power was still in Linde's hands. Of course, the key to this statement is the subtle change in the name of Lena, which is regarded as an official seal. Linde and Lena are no longer in a Schrödinger relationship. Later, Linde and Reina invited some knights from the Lars family army to hold a military meeting. After Reina appeared, the pressure to implement military reforms suddenly decreased a lot. Originally, Linde wanted to hold at least a formal wedding, but Reina tried her best to stop it. Weddings of great nobles are long and troublesome, especially with Reina's current status, and the etiquette steps may be worse than Reina's original etiquette points. There are more. Just listening to the bald elders explain the process, Lena felt that her head was going to be bald too. The bald elders even dug out the records of the governor's wedding in the old empire from nowhere, and planned to use those as well. Added in. So under Lena's strong opposition, everything was exactly the same as usual. There was no wedding of the century, no special statement, and no one was even surprised by Lena's hairstyle. It seemed like it should be that way. Chapter 87. Barlow finished his day's work and walked out of the mage tower tiredly. A second-level rune master, in the border countryside, is a person who even the lords and nobles have to receive in person and treat him with great courtesy. But this is the royal capital. If you are a piece of gold, then the royal capital will be splendid. Second-level rune masters can only fight against the masters in the mage tower. Barlow is already considered one of the lucky ones. After all, the Twilight Tower where he is located is a subordinate organization of the Royal Mage Tower and is affiliated with the Royal Professionals Association, so he can be regarded as a high-ranking official. If there were no accidents, Barlow should live on the edge of the inner city, living a life between the Mage Tower and his home every day, but as expected, an accident occurred. Barlow's sister Sharon, who has been dependent on him since childhood, is suffering from a strange disease. She is weak and will constantly cough up blood. There will be sores on her body and slowly fester. Recently, more and more people in the capital seem to be suffering from it. For this originally rare disease, alchemists scratched their heads and failed to refine a specific medicine. Rumors say that using the church's holy water can cure the disease, but holy water is already precious, and now the price has soared. People like Barlow, who has no connections in the church and no money, can only work part-time while carefully taking care of his sister. Because of this disease, Sharon had given up her studies. When she was about to lose her ability, Barlow chose the mysterious loan that started to spread in the capital. With this loan, Barlow obtained a small bottle of holy water. After using it, Sharon's complexion improved greatly and she can now go out for a walk. You're back, brother. Seeing his sister waiting for him with blood on her face, Barlow felt that the fatigue on his body and the stench of the outer city were not so important. Barlow, who originally lived on the edge of the inner city, had to move to the outer city in order to save money for his sister's medical treatment. Don't you have to work part-time today? My part-time job is resting there today, so I can take you out for a walk. No, brother, I still need to spin. The lady next door lent me the spinning wheel. I have to spin the material into yarn in the next 2 days. Barlow looked at his sister's hands and the simple spinning wheel behind him with some distress, and said, the pastor said, you must go out more often and breathe fresh air. My brother just got paid today, so let's go to the inner city. Turn around. Seeing that Barlow was resolute, his sister had no choice but to nod and follow him out. The biggest change in the inner city of the royal capital is that there are more green-skinned demons on the streets. Seeing his sister taking a few curious glances at the green-skinned demons, Barlow explained, because the Prime Minister has just promoted a Freedom Act that allows demons to pass through specific areas of the kingdom. As soon as Barlow finished speaking, he saw several nobles leading students in a parade not far away. There have been more and more parades in the royal capital recently. Although the Lars family fell and it was said that it split into 4 parts, the people in the royal capital were increasingly dissatisfied with the new king. I saw the nobleman leading the students shouting, restricted freedom is not real freedom. I hope the king can put down discrimination and allow the peace-loving demons to freely enter the western and southern territories. The students behind him immediately started shouting. Did His Majesty the King do anything? My sister looked at the parade not far away with some curiosity. Because she hasn't been to school for a long time, her sister no longer knows much about the situation in the outside world. No, His Majesty the King didn't do anything. When he signed the Freedom Act, he stipulated that the demons could not go to the western and southern territories where they were preparing for war. However, some people think that this is not true freedom and is discrimination against the demons. A betrayal of an ally. Being among the affiliated organizations of the Royal Professionals Association, Barlow will always hear some news like this whether he likes it or not. Barlow somewhat didn't understand. His Majesty the King has given these demons enough privileges. Why do these nobles still say that His Majesty discriminates against these demons? In Barlow's view, these nobles just wanted to take advantage of His Majesty the King's reforms to find an excuse to pick on the new king, in order to demonstrate their authority. At this time, a frivolous voice came over, "Little girl, are you free? How about we have a meal together?" A green hand patted Sharon's shoulder. Sharon subconsciously hid from Barlow, and Barlow subconsciously grabbed him. "What do you want to do to my sister?" But Barlow soon regretted it. The targets of harassing his sister were two demons. The demon smiled evilly when he saw this, and immediately started shouting, "Help! Humans are bullying the demons again." Another demon also raised his voice and said loudly, "Aren't we just a bit uglier? I didn't expect that you humans actually discriminate against demons. Is this how you humans treat your guests?" Immediately, the whole street's attention was attracted. Barlow was stunned for a moment, then immediately released the other person's hand and explained, I didn't, it was you who took the initiative to strike up a conversation." But it was already too late. The nobleman who was marching saw the situation here and immediately surrounded him with his people. When a demon saw someone coming, he immediately started crying, saying that the demon was originally as noble as the elves and could use magic naturally, but because of the jealousy of humans, they were driven to the eternal frozen soil by the Lars family. Another demon was crying and wiping his tears, talking about how pitiful the demons were, what inhuman treatment they had suffered, and how they were abused by the Lars family. The more he spoke, the more the surrounding nobles became angrier, as if they wanted to eat the brother and sister alive. "You humans just look down on us. We demons have obviously helped you maintain peace in the north, but your king won't even let us enter the rest of the kingdom. And we just wanted to have friendly cultural exchanges with your sister, but you humans did this to us." After finishing speaking, the two demons gasped and shouted. As more and more people were around, Barlow felt more and more unable to argue. In the end, he had no choice but to take his sister and escape before the situation got out of control. After escaping home, Barlow comforted his sister, but the more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. Previously, one of his colleagues seemed to have been fired for discriminating against demons, but people really look down on demons, but Barlow, to be honest, I don't have any bad feelings towards demons. Although Barlow once took history as an elective and knew why the Lars family drove the demons to the eternal frozen soil, Barlow felt that it was all in the past, and the current demons should not bear the sins of the past. Although the demon Barlow would not go up to talk to him enthusiastically when he usually saw him, he would just treat him as an ordinary person. What's more, with the vigorous publicity of Kaldek, the demon has long been portrayed as intelligent, tolerant, and peace-loving. Race, coupled with the strong support of the royal capital's nobles, who dares to look down on the demons in the royal capital. Although it was obviously not his fault, Barlow still thought about finding a chance to apologize to the other party tomorrow. With an uneasy mood, after comforting his sister, Barlow dragged his tired body and fell asleep. Chapter 88. The next day, when Barlow thought that things could go away slowly after finding the other party to apologize, he found that the bottom of the Tower of Twilight had been splashed with red paint, and someone had also written in red paint on the tower, "Discrimination against demons." The anxious Barlow entered the mage tower and saw his colleagues looking at him with a look that was hard to explain. "Barlow, everyone can just talk about the demon clan. How can you actually do it? What happened last night has been artistically processed and spread throughout the capital. Barlow and his sister have turned into ugly, evil, and racially prejudiced villains. Just because the demon accidentally touched his sister, Barlow has to rely on him." As a member of the Royal Professionals Association, he chopped off the opponent's hand. Before Barlow could explain, the owner of the mage tower stood up and shouted, "Barlow, you are fired." Many colleagues looked at Barlow with sympathetic eyes. They were very familiar with this honest colleague. Not to mention discriminating against demons, he might not even dare to look at people, let alone say that kind of thing in the street. But there is no way, not only the pressure from the nobles above, but if Barlow is not fired, those people will incite the common people of the capital, gangsters and students to block the entrance of the mage tower, making it impossible for the mage tower to even work normally. Forget about those students from the royal capital who may have a lot of background behind them. After all, there are not many in number, but the mage tower does not even have the right to expel the civilians of the royal capital, because once the mage tower takes action against these civilians who usually only use their nostrils to see, the mage tower will usually those aristocratic gentlemen who don't care about the life and death of their subordinates will immediately turn into good men and start impeachment crazily. And for this reason, he began to put pressure on the new king in order to slow down the new king's reform policy. The confused Barlow returned to his home in the outer city, only to see that the front of his hut had also been spray painted with red paint and graffiti. A terrible thought appeared in Barlow's mind, and Barlow rushed like crazy. He walked towards his home and opened the door, only to see Sharon shivering in the corner. "Brother, I'm so scared. They and their people have been smashing up the house since you left." Barlow hugged his sister tightly and comforted, "It's okay, brother is back. Life still has to go on," but all the part-time jobs that Barlow worked for heard about Barlow's affairs overnight, and they all terminated their contracts and severed their relationships. The debt collectors of Barlow's loans also came to collect debts not long after. "Barlow, it's time to pay back the money." "Sir, this doesn't add up. Why is the interest rate so much higher than the original one?" Barlow was shocked when he took the bill in his hand. He originally thought that even if he lost his job temporarily, he could slowly think of a solution with a little savings, but the interest alone has already made Barlow bankrupt. "You don't want to pay back the money? Aren't you afraid of being accused again of not paying back the money you owe the demons?" The debt collector slapped the IOU onto Barlow's desk. Demon clan? Did I borrow this loan from the demon clan? Otherwise? I'm just doing odd jobs, and all this money is the demon master's money. Barlow took a closer look at the loan agreement and discovered that it was actually a well-disguised compound interest loan, also known as compound interest. Fear, confusion, anger, and negative emotions rushed into Barlow's mind for a moment, but the debt collector just glanced at Barlow's sister behind him, and Barlow calmed down and took out all his family property to pay off the interest. This time is just interest. I will come again next month, remember to be prepared, otherwise I think your sister is quite beautiful. The debt collector left Barlow's red-painted house with a smirk. At dusk, Barlow did not dare to let his sister stay at home alone anymore, so he took his sister to the recruitment place to look for a job. To make matters worse, my sister also had a relapse of her old illness and started coughing up blood. Logically speaking, a second-level rune master should not be in such a miserable state, but no one with dignity dared to approach Barlow, even if the salary Barlow asked for was not even that of a first-level rune master. Now Barlow just wants to find a job that can allow him and his sister to survive. Brother, what do you think of this? It seems like both of us can do this. Barlow looked in the direction of his sister's finger. In the corner of the job recruitment information, there was indeed a job with incredibly good pay. But the workplace says grey collar. Barlow, who has been working in the Tower of Twilight, knows this place. It is in the north, where Governor Linde rules. In the public opinion of the royal capital, the western part of the northern border where grey collar is located is both poor and barbaric. Doug Lars, who lives next door, has been baptized by the king, has reflected on the mistakes of the Lars family before, and has become a member of the royal capital's nobility. There are even rumors that he will become the new Grand Duke of the North. But Linde inherited all the bad habits of the old Lars. It is said that he and Lina Lars had to eat 2 babies alive every meal, and their rule was even hell on earth. Barlow knew that the real situation would probably not be so exaggerated, but both Barlow and his sister had seen the painting that Caldic had exhibited about the previous situation in the north. However, the benefits on the recruitment board are indeed very generous, even higher than Barlow's previous salary in the Tower of Twilight, and they are allotted, and a first-level rune master can be assigned a house. As mentioned above, the governor likes to discuss mathematics, so even if you don't know runes and are not a professional, as long as your mathematics level is sufficient, you can still have a job. Brother, I have studied in school before, and I can also do math work. Barlow nodded. Although his sister did not continue to go to school due to illness, the foundation was still there. The most important thing is that the demons can only travel within the territory of Doug Lars and his team, and the western part of the northern border may provide them with shelter. Barlow was really moved. At this time, a bard dressed as an actor appeared out of nowhere. Boy, are you interested in this job? The bard bowed politely and looked up at the brother and sister. I'm the one in charge of this job. Although the bard was unreliable at first glance, when he saw the North Wind Bear tattooed on his costume, Barlow still took his sister to a nearby room. After all, not everyone in the capital now dares to use the North Wind Bear pattern. Even Doug Lars and the others have given up this family emblem. If he is a liar, he is too dedicated. After discussing the work location and salary in detail, Barlow said hesitantly, I have some things that I need to confirm, is that okay? Although he can hide his situation, if he is discovered, Barlow is afraid that something worse will happen. After all, in the eyes of the people in the capital, the north is now a war-torn wilderness. Staying in the capital may just mean being exploited. When he arrived in the north, Barlow was afraid that he might die without knowing why. Barlow explained in detail the current situation of himself and his sister, but the bard just touched his chin and asked, Can you show me your IOU? Barlow nodded and took out the long and smelly IOU that he had read over and over again. After looking at it for a while, the bard said, Your IOU is illegal according to our northern regulations and the laws of the kingdom. Not to mention compound interest, the interest calculated is higher than the maximum interest rate for nobles to borrow money. The interest rate was so outrageous that it was even higher than the interest rates lent by nobles. Seeing that Barlow still didn't understand, the bard added, Illegal EIS are naturally not valid. After hearing this, Barlow was completely relieved. Then, the bard said half-jokingly, To be honest, there are too many people in your situation recently. I even suspect that some people are specifically looking for us to escape their debts. Are there many people like me? Barlow was a little shocked, wasn't he an exception? There are many, but not many are as unlucky as you. The bard sighed, at least many people fled to the north because they couldn't repay the loans. It seems that more and more demons in the royal capital have started to lend money at usury. And most of the people who took out loans are for medical treatment, to treat my sister's disease. The bard looked like he had seen something funny. Barlow suspected that the bard in front of him must know something, but he did not dare to think about it. He just asked, When can my sister and I go to Grey Collar? The bard just nodded, It will be soon. The Grey-White Collar is full of surprises. Maybe it can cure your sister's stubborn illness. Barlow just smiled awkwardly. This was a disease that even the central church of the royal capital was helpless about. How could a little grey-collar worker be able to do anything about it? Chapter 89. When he heard the information sent back from Villainous men from the royal capital, Linde couldn't help but raise his forehead. The last time I felt like the world was going crazy was when I heard that ISA had rebelled. So a large number of low-level professionals came to grey-collar jobs because of bankruptcy, right? My kings are not many in number, only about a few dozen in total, but it should be enough to build a mage tower. Villainous bent down and handed over the latest information. No, this number is already exaggerated. If even low-level professionals are affected, then it will be even harder for ordinary people to survive. Linde lowered his eyebrows and fell into deep thought about this information. The demons made a big mistake in the royal capital, promoted usury, and turned the royal capital upside down. Unexpectedly, they sent a lot of talents and labor to Linde. But to be honest, Linde was not happy. There are only a few grey-collar workers. According to the information from the royal capital, loan sharking is just one of the more subtle methods of the demons. These demons are hoarding large amounts of food and medicine, but the nobles of the royal capital have chosen to turn a blind eye. After all, most nobles would do the same. But the nature of the two sides is slightly different. The nobles are accustomed to exploiting their own territories, while the demons monopolize the food and medicine on the market. This has also led to the price of goods in the royal capital getting higher and higher. Although there is no trend of collapse yet, the princes and nobles of the royal capital don't seem to notice it at all. This is also the difference between the intelligence systems of the two sides. Linde pays more attention to people's livelihood and economic intelligence, which is exactly what the gentlemen of the royal capital care least about. Furthermore, according to the description in the intelligence, the strange symptoms in the capital are very similar to a disease we contracted, including coughing up blood, skin ulcers, and suppuration. However, the symptoms in the capital are all chronic. Flora's voice was a little hoarse, and although her tone was calm, it was difficult to conceal the anger in her voice. Does this disease appear in the territory now? Can it be cured? Linde frowned, and he could basically assume that these strange diseases were spread by the demons in the capital. ISA has already contacted churches in various places. If similar symptoms occur, she will report it immediately. If there is holy water, prevention or cure will not be difficult. Then, Flora continued to add, since there is no widespread infection in the capital, and only a small number of people have symptoms, it means that the contagion is not strong, and it is estimated that the demons will not dare to do it too blatantly. After hearing this, Linde's frown relaxed a little. We still need to take good precautions. If those who come to the territory are infected with these strange symptoms, they should be cured first. After everyone reported their work and left, Linde took out the information that had been sent back from the capital and read it by himself. Brother, Linde, what happened? Lina, who could not continue to be brothers, had just returned from the military camp and saw Linde with a serious expression. The recent research on magic focusing arrays and magic transmission was becoming more and more successful, and Linde's was rarely seen. His expression was so serious. The new king in the capital seems to be under a lot of pressure. When Linde saw Reina coming back, he was just about to find someone to talk to and sort out his thoughts. After telling Reina what was happening in the capital, Linde continued, Augustine III initially allocated too much power in order to suppress the northern territory, but his death was too sudden. It seems that the newly appointed king has not had time to take back those powers. Furthermore, in order to advance the reform, Crane Augustine still needed to constantly negotiate and compromise with the nobles, which led to the weakening of the royal power. Even some ordinary nobles dared to criticize the new king's policies on the street. Reina didn't understand the subsequent series of analyses, and just asked, isn't this a good thing? This is a good thing, but the demons are also our enemies. If Crane Augustine doesn't control these demons, does he know how long it will take for the kingdom's economy to begin to collapse, and how many people will not have enough to eat because of this? Linde slammed the table angrily. Then we want to help the capital. Reina pulled Linde back with one word. No, we ourselves have just eaten, why should we help our enemies? After scolding, Linde also calmed down. Kellen Augustine was not a fool, otherwise he would not have specifically restricted the demons' movements in the kingdom. At least he knew not to let the demons contact the western and southern territories. But this also shows that the other party may no longer be able to control the nobles under his command. Linde can overthrow everything and start over again, using absolute violence to establish a new order, but Crane cannot. In fact, Linde, you have already thought about what to do. Linde was stunned and nodded, Clan Augustine is not stupid. As long as he is reminded a little, he will know what to do. If the economy really collapses, it will also affect us. A half-dead king all are in line with our current interests. Whenever Linde was a little impatient, he would always calm down after talking to Lina. It was the same this time. After chatting with Lina about the situation in the army, Linde took out the letter and planned to use it as the governor of the north. Write a letter to Crane Augustine on behalf of. The content of the letter is relatively outspoken and directly writes down the situation that Lucanus investigated in the royal capital. After all, this is only the price and market conditions of the royal capital, and cannot be regarded as intelligence. Only when such a dazzling number is placed in Crane Augustine's face can the other party truly realize what is going on now, instead of guessing about Linde's conspiracy behind his back. But Linde felt that it was still not safe. When he saw the intelligence that Crane Augustine asked his saintly fiancé copyrightee who was suspected of being a time traveler to help him carry out reforms, he thought about it and decided to write a letter to the time traveler opposite. Linde had no interest in exchanging codes with the other party, so as not to cause a misunderstanding by Crane Augustine and prevent the letter from being delivered to the other party. In the letter written to Lilith, the time traveler, Linde listed the situation in the royal capital in more detail. If the other person is from the same country as himself and has received 9 years of compulsory education, he should know what to do now. Not long after, in the royal capital, Crane Augustine smiled bitterly after receiving Linde's letter. How could he not know about the situation in the royal capital? However, it is true that the king's power has shrunk. Recently, I heard that the East Territory and Douglar with SI getting together, if the Southwest and Southwest were not very loyal, it could be said that it would be difficult for Kellen to move forward. However, some of the suggestions in the letter are indeed worthy of reference. At least the prices in the royal capital must be controlled. On the other side, Lilith also received this letter from the north. Originally, Lilith was still curious about what the other party had to say, but as she read it, she realized something was wrong. A familiar feeling rushed over her face, taking Lilith back to the days when she was being pointed at by her elder brother when doing homework at school. The most important thing is that the suggestions in the letter are indeed very effective, which makes Lilith feel very unhappy, but she can't find any reason to refute. Not only that, the person who wrote the letter later seemed to be very enthusiastic, and even explained to Lilith how to support her cronies and suppress her political opponents. This is obviously intended to bring fire. Lilith was a little speechless. She was no longer in power, so what was the use of saying this? Although Crane also allocated a lot of power to Lilith and relied on the power of Lilith and the Holy See to promote reforms, Lilith's main source of power was still her status as a saint of the Holy See. However, some of the opinions in the letter were indeed of great reference value. Lilith collected the letter and decided to find a way to control the prices in the market first. Some important things must be controlled by the state. Chapter 90. Starting from entering the northern border, the scene Barlow saw was basically the same as what Kaldek had advertised. There were ruins all along the way, and the cries of children and the sounds of crows and vultures were endless. All the young and middle-aged people were missing. They seemed to have been recruited as soldiers. There were old people doing farm work in the fields. The entire northern border was a lifeless scene. This made Barlow put his heart in his throat directly. He held his sister Sharon's hand and the rune scroll in his arms, ready to jump out of the car and run away at any time. It wasn't until the carriage suddenly started to become smoother that Barlow finally felt relieved. After the carriage became stable, the surroundings were finally no longer full of ruins. Even the scattered buildings looked more exquisite than most of the buildings in the royal capital, at least much more exquisite than the house Barlow rented in the outer city. The roads seemed to be paved with a kind of alchemy material. It was hard to imagine how much money the lords here spent to connect these roads. The surroundings are also bustling with people, and there is an endless stream of caravans and carriages coming and going. Although I have long heard that the western part of the north is economically prosperous because of the Champagne nobles, the prosperity here is still far beyond Barlow's imagination. Is this a grey-collar job? Barlow asked the carriage driver curiously. No, this is Evan's territory. It seems to have been renamed Shige County recently because it is rich in stones. The carriage driver started chattering like a modern taxi driver. Although stones can be found everywhere, the governor here said that the stones here are the best and can be used to build houses and castles. Although I don't understand, what the governor said must be right. The entire West uses the stones here. Stones build houses. Barlow looked around, and sure enough, most of the houses were built with the same black stone. There is also the water wheel. I heard that it was invented by the governor's wife. Unfortunately, the one in Shige County is not big enough. The grey and white collar water wheel is bigger. I heard that some scholars have gone to grey and white collar to study the water wheel. Our governor, madam, you are much smarter than those scholars. The driver held his head high and his chest high, very proud, which made Barlow a little confused. How could Raina Lars be different from the aristocratic shame that had been rumored in the royal capital? At this time, the carriage was suddenly stopped, and Barlow's heart suddenly skipped a beat. If nothing else happened, another accident would happen. A nun wearing a strange beak mask boarded the carriage and asked, "Are there any sick patients here?" Barlow held Sharon's hand tightly. Sharon glanced at Barlow, and Barlow just shook his head to be silent. I am afraid that the other party knows that there are strange illnesses in the royal capital, and is afraid that these illnesses will spread to the territory. But Barlow had no choice. His sister was everything to him. If his sister was taken away, Barlow might as well just run away with her. Seeing that no one was speaking, the nun was not in a hurry and said, "The Governor-General said that if someone is sick, they can go to the nearest church for treatment. No fees will be charged. I just hope that you will not hide it." Everyone on the carriage did not dare to say anything. Who would believe such a good thing? They might disappear after arriving at the local church, or they might even be burned together later. The nun was not in a hurry, but took out her pocket watch and waited. Just when Barlow didn't know what the other party was planning, Sharon suddenly pulled into Barlow's sleeve. Seeing Sharon's face flushed from holding back, Barlow knew that his sister was about to cough up blood. When he was about to make a loud noise to help his sister cover it up, Sharon finally couldn't help but coughed up in pain. Sharon looked at the blood on her hands and felt that her vision was a little blurry. Her already weak body and her current extreme nervousness made Sharon feel a little dizzy. The nun also noticed Sharon at this time, and slowly moved towards Sharon, her hand still fumbling for something in her bag. As soon as Barlow saw it, he immediately held Sharon in his arms and shouted, "My sister is just a little uncomfortable, we will leave by ourselves, don't come over." But the nun seemed unmoved. The powerful sense of oppression brought by the beak mask made Barlow feel a little desperate. Was it really a mistake to choose to come to the north? The nun knelt down. Just when Barlow thought that the other party was going to take away his sister, the nun just reached out and touched several places on her sister's body, and then touched her forehead. Then the nun took out a bottle of medicine from her bag and said, "Drink it." Sharon was a little scared, fearing that she would never wake up after drinking this bottle of potion. Barlow even made a direct move to grab the bottle of potion, but the nun's quick eyesight and quick hands made Barlow miss. The nun, who seemed to understand, had no choice but to take off her mask, revealing a face full of scars under the mask. This directly shocked both Barlow and Sharon, but Barlow quickly reacted, "And the nun's face, the scars on my body are somewhat similar to those on my sister before. I used to be like this, and it was much worse than you. But after drinking these medicines, you are much better. You only have early symptoms now, and you will recover quickly, and you won't leave these ugly scars like us. These are the ancestral potions passed down by the governor, and they will make you feel better soon. After the nun finished speaking, she handed the potion to Sharon again. Barlow was still hesitant, but after Sharon saw the face under the nun's mask, she took the potion and drank it in one gulp. Brother, I feel much more comfortable. Sharon touched her body in disbelief and said to Barlow in shock. Seeing this, the nun put on her mask again and said, after arriving at Grey Collar, remember to report your physical condition to the local church every week. If other symptoms appear, you must contact the local nun as soon as possible. Do you understand? Sharon nodded confusedly, and the nun jumped out of the carriage after briefly registering the information of the two brothers and sisters. Soon, the carriage started to continue on the road. Is there really nothing uncomfortable? Barlow looked at his sister who was gradually getting better in shock. It's really getting better, brother. Sharon pulled Barlow to her ear and said softly, and the potion tastes a bit like the holy water that I drank before. Really? I don't know, it doesn't seem to be the same. After hearing Sharon's answer, Barlow finally felt relieved. The holy water was not something on the street. Maybe the Grey Collar governor had developed a special medicine. Brother, the holy water you gave me to drink before seems to have been mixed with water. This one tastes better. Barlow, who originally thought that the governor here was a descendant of the old empire was just a rumor, suddenly felt that it was not impossible. After all, it was more reliable than giving away holy water for free. In this way, the two brothers and sisters set foot on the road to the Grey Collar again. On the carriage, Barlow vaguely remembered the scarred face of the nun at that time, suddenly woke up and gave himself a slap. I'm so damned good. Chapter 91. The bard in the royal capital did not lie. After confirming the identity of Barlow as a second-level rune master, he arranged an exquisite small house for Barlow. But the work content is very different from what Barlow imagined. Although it was indeed as rumored that the governor was going to build a mage tower, this mage tower was completely different from what Barlow had imagined. All functions of the mage tower have been simplified, leaving only the function of storing and releasing magic power. It is not so much a mage tower, but judging from its current appearance, it is more like a huge black obelisk. At the same time, there are dense and complex wiring on the ground around the obelisk, most of which are metal pipes. The complex circular runic array is surrounded by rings around the obelisk, and paired with the simple obelisk, it has an indescribable beauty. Don't you think this is beautiful? A blonde young man appeared next to Barlow. This is more beautiful than any mage tower I've ever seen. Barlow also nodded when he heard this. This huge obelisk only has a few rooms that look like they are for maintenance. The rest are all made of magic stone, primary color sand and some conductive materials. Simple. Simple, yet majestic. The blonde young man stretched out his hand and introduced himself, Sean Lars. Barlow also shook hands subconsciously and replied, Barlow Hubert. But Barlow quickly realized the surname after the other person's first name, and immediately retracted his hand. He was confused for a while and didn't know what etiquette to use to salute. Sean held down the other person's overwhelmed hands and said, I'm just an apprentice here, just call me Sean. That being said, no one dares to really treat Sean as an ordinary apprentice, even though he is indeed wearing the same uniform as everyone else. Grey collar workers did not directly assign jobs to professionals like Barlow. Instead, they gathered these professionals together for pre-job training after the assessment. The main learning content is the magic trigger and the arcane magic circle. A petite female teacher stumbled on the podium with a thick notebook and explained the working principle of the arcane magic circle, as well as the various parameters of magic transmission, and the rune magic circle. Dismantling. The professionals in the audience also gradually became solemn from the confusion and contempt at the beginning. Barlow even began to have trouble understanding what the petite female teacher on the stage was saying. All kinds of complicated parameters and formulas filled Barlow's mind. Simply relying on calculations instead of using professionals to drive magic power, everyone feels that they must be crazy to sit here and learn these weird knowledge. However, many people are obsessed with this knowledge, and even feel deeply trapped in it. They feel that this is the secret of the old empire, and want to run out and practice it immediately. After all, most of the people who come here are frustrated and marginalized professionals. Who hasn't imagined that they are the proud ones of heaven? The mathematical Olympiad array seems to have given them a track that at least does not require them to compete for magic talent. I don't know if the governor thought of this, but in the afternoon these professionals were pulled to the construction site under the obelisk to start practicing. It was only at this time that Barlow finally knew what this minimalist mage tower was used for. To put it simply, this is an energy supply device. In this regard, it is no different from an ordinary mage tower. It is just that the mage tower provides magic power to the professionals in the tower, but this obelisk is connected to other towers of buildings. The huge magic circle below is the main body of the magic focusing array. The circular magic circle under the obelisk is called the mother magic circle, which is used to concentrate the magic power of the obelisk for distribution. The task of Barlow and others is to plan the sub-arrays connected to the mother array according to the corresponding requirements, to connect the magic circuits on both sides, and to tune and couple the magic power from the mother array, and then use these magic powers to send to where needed via transmission media. The obelisk is a huge power source, and the magic circle below is a capacitor, which may also be responsible for the work of a transformer. At this time, a sub-array has been planned in the magic focusing array, which is used to charge the magic container made of primary color sand. The task of Barlow and others is to imitate this subarray and make other subarrays according to requirements. The first is the design of the magic array interface. By recompiling the rune characters in the arcana array, the two magic arrays are connected to each other, and the magic power flows from the higher array to the lower array. What? Magic circle interface? Rune versus high-level magic circle? The first thing Barlow suspected was that his ears heard it wrong, and then he doubted his very average common language scores during his student days. Barlow felt that his many years of career as a second-level rune master were of no use here. The previous parent array and subarrays were completely beyond the scope of knowledge of a second-level rune master. Barlow could only understand them as arrays with different functions. The magic circle interface has completely touched Barlow's knowledge blind spot. Linde seemed to realize something and said, "The compilation teaching materials of rune verses will be distributed to all students later. Don't worry, it's very simple. Facts have proved that mathematics may be more about talent than using magic, and many people even feel a little desperate after studying for a day. This is a completely new magic system, a magic system based on mathematics. The biggest role of the magic mobilization that professionals relied on before in this system is to check calculations and exhaustive calculations." In the evening, in the makeshift classroom, after seeing her first batch of students despairing after seeing the magic focusing array, Linde also realized that her start was a bit too difficult, so she had to try her best to comfort everyone. "Don't be afraid, everyone. As long as you master the basic knowledge, the arcane magic circle is very simple. Even the rune craftsman can easily master some of today's basics. I can't even mobilize my magic power. You can definitely do better." When they heard that these were just the basics, everyone became even more desperate. However, when they heard Linde saying that she could not mobilize her magic power, many people looked at the little teacher in front of them with expressions like monsters. Fortunately, even if they can't understand the mathematical Olympiad, these people can still do many basic calculations. This is not only everyone's homework, but also their own job. Although most people don't know the meaning of the question in their hand, after reading the compilation of rune characters, Barlow seems to have a vague feeling that these rune characters, which are all numbers, are not like it's just numbers, more like a new language. When everyone was about to leave, Sean stopped Barlow and began to ask Barlow some questions about rune verses, because among everyone, only Barlow started writing after the questions were distributed. "Sir Sean, why don't you just ask the teacher for advice?" Barlow was a little strange. It was already magical for the governor's brother-in-law to learn these things with him, but he didn't expect to ask him questions. Sean showed a wry smile. "You don't have to call me sir, Teacher Lisha's dimension is too high. My talent in this area is very average, and I really can't understand." Barlow was convinced. After communicating with Sean for a while, Barlow asked, "Why is Sir Sean so obsessed with this obelisk? You can just be responsible for the management work, right? My brother-in-law once spent a day setting up a tent by himself in order to set the standards for setting up tents. If I don't understand how the obelisk works, how will I manage the obelisk in the future?" Sean continued, "Besides, don't you want to carve your name on this first obelisk?" After returning to his new home, Barlow did not scratch his head at the question like others, but kept thinking about Sean's words. The governor did not build this obelisk and the magic focus array simply for the purpose of building a spectacle. Recalling the mathematical array he came into contact with today and the factories along the way when he came to Grey Collar, Barlow suddenly understood the significance of the obelisk. After lighting the lamp, Barlow was so excited that he took out the textbooks and manuscript papers distributed today. A new era was coming, and the key to the new era was now in his hands. Be sure to carve your name on the obelisk. Chapter 92. When the mechanical lathe started, a low roar sounded throughout the workshop. The operator pressed the start button and the lathe vibrated momentarily, then stabilized. The magic mechanism started to operate, driving the transmission bell to rotate rapidly and making a slight buzzing sound. The cutting tool slowly advances forward and comes into contact with the metal workpiece, making a harsh friction sound and the sound of metal chips flying. The coolant is sprayed on the workpiece, emitting bursts of white smoke and emitting a unique metallic smell. The whole process was full of mechanical power and precise coordination, which made Linde feel extremely satisfied. The lathe uses the latest primary color sand magic container, which is more durable than the direct supply of magic stone in the past. The original plan was to connect directly to the obelisk through the transmission medium, but after all, the obelisk was not fully connected yet, and a large number of subarrays needed to be planned. Lisha's original design was even more exaggerated than the obelisk that had been built in the territory now. It was originally planned to use wireless power supply. It only needs to be within the power supply range of the obelisk to connect to each other through a specific arcana array for remote power supply. However, the current algorithm of the mathematical array cannot keep up, and the material requirements are also very high, which will cause a large amount of magic power to escape. Linde can only adopt a more conservative plan, but Linde believes that in the future, what Lisha envisioned will be this energy supply method may not be impossible. With the lathe, the weapons and equipment in the territory can finally start real mass production, instead of relying on the original rune craftsman to rub sparks day and night. Coupled with the original color sand magic container, individual combat can achieve the ultimate endurance, and the enchantments on the armor can also be updated. Linde has even begun to think about the feasibility of power armor. But unfortunately, even the internal combustion engine that converts magic power into mechanical energy has just begun in the territory. Because he was not an engineering major, Linde could only describe in detail the classic engine model and general design ideas of his previous life, and handed it over to Reina and the craftsman for research. Although the transmission device finally designed is a bit weird and the conversion rate is a bit low, at best it sounds like there is a lot of room for improvement, but at worst it is just a waste of energy. But at least it can be used. No matter how much power is wasted, the magic engine of grey-white collar can be regarded as being put into production. This lathe is driven by the latest engine. As autumn is coming to an end, the north is the first to welcome the arrival of winter, just like in the past. If it is normal, the Northern Territory will usually start to rest directly after the busy farming in autumn, because the winter in the Northern Territory is long and difficult. Even the Northerners, who are known for their warlike and bravery, will choose to lie down in this cold winter season. Ping, praying that the food he has accumulated can help him survive the winter. The pressure on the nobles will be much less. Even for them, winter is the best time to socialize. With the help of magic and professionals, the cold is not worth mentioning. There are even many products on the market that specialize in helping nobles survive the winter. Of sleight of hand scrolls. The heating tricks on these scrolls were quickly dismantled and analyzed by the grey-white collar workers, and they were made into a mathematical arcana. People who have just arrived in grey collar are surprised to find that there is a lot of work to do here in winter, or rather it needs to be done. The benevolent governor not only provided hot meals, customized winter clothes, and even special winter subsidies. Families with a little savings would choose the thermal scrolls produced in the territory to stick to their bodies. However, the grey and white collar workers who had just arrived had no savings yet. Those people can also use these subsidies to purchase some charcoal for heating. The governor had just announced the winter production plan, and then various factories began to rise from the ground, and a large amount of basic equipment piled up on the territory like snowflakes falling from the sky. Even though Darcy was wearing a heavy winter coat, he did not forget to wear his marksmanship medal personally awarded by his lord. The bronze medal looked even more dazzling under the reflection of the winter sun, but the two soldiers who followed Darcy from time to time, he looked at the medal on Darcy's chest with envy. It's not because of the special subsidies brought by the medals. These two soldiers were previously knight attendants of the Lars family, or trainee knights. Although the living conditions are not very good, they are not greedy for the small subsidies, especially in after officially enlisting in the army. But for the soldiers of Lars, glory is the most important. The military training of the Lars army is that they would rather die on the battlefield than leave their backs to the enemy, especially those who might have become Lars knights. Of followers. Darcy's medals not only represent glory, but more importantly, the governor's approval. For these followers, these medals are simply a pass to become a knight. Even though the knight class no longer has any privileges and is simply an honorary title, this title is like a dancing girl in a winter tavern for the Lars people, with a fatal attraction. However, the two soldiers were convinced by Darcy, especially when they saw Darcy hunting two rabbits with a new shotgun. Rabbits are year-round animals, so it's not surprising that they appear in winter. What's difficult is how to hit a grey rabbit when even the bushes and woods are deserted. Darcy skillfully handled the rabbit, put it on the ground and started roasting it. The other two soldiers also skillfully took out various seasonings and prepared for a feast. The little girl next to the three soldiers watched in a daze. This is the seventh person that Darcy's team has found after leaving the western part of the north. The training mission of the winter soldiers has not stopped, but some soldiers, including Darcy, have received special orders from Linde. That is to arrest people? No, it is to persuade people to come to the old business of grey-collar workers, but the target has changed from the savage village in the mountains to the civilians in Doug Lars territory. Doug Lars' governance can be said to be a mess, because in order to gather the army and reward the three armies, Doug, whose territory was already in a mess, chose to borrow money from the demons and seek help. But now, in order to repay the original loan shark, Doug Lars can only continue to exploit the new territory he just acquired. His methods are so cruel that even if Colin comes, he can only lament that he was still too limited. As a result, the rebels in the north are fighting more and more, and the more the rebellion is suppressed, the more chaotic it becomes. The three Doug brothers have not fully restored production in the territory until now. Seeing the drooling girl beside him, Darcy without hesitation tore off half of the rabbit and handed it to her. Can I eat it? The girl took the half rabbit stuck on the branch. Of course, this is food for you. Otherwise for us brothers, this would just be a toothpaste festival. After Darcy finished speaking, the other two soldiers also laughed. One soldier took out his own seasoning and sprinkled it evenly on the rabbit for the girl. This is delicious. I heard that the governor and his wife like to use this when eating duck. The soldier poured it back and introduced it. When the girl saw the soldier coming to her side, she trembled as if in stress. Another soldier saw it and thought the girl was cold, so he took off his coat and put it on the girl's body. At the same time, he also poured more into the fire. A few branches were lost. Didn't you always want to look at people with your nostrils? What? You started when you saw that the other person was a girl. Darcy teased with a wicked smile. FKU. A soldier pretended to kick Darcy and said, did you pay attention to the lecture? Secretary ISA said that we are all the subjects of the goddess and the governor. There is no difference between high and low when we work for the governor point. The three soldiers were joking with each other. The way back was their few free time. If the girl hadn't seen these three men wearing enchanted armor and holding guns, they would have directly killed a group of Doug Lars soldiers. If Tutu was clean, he might really think that the three soldiers were kind-hearted neighbor brothers who showed up halfway. But after seeing it, the girl felt that the scene in front of her was even more magical. The soldier who treated the enemy like a devil actually treated a civilian like a spring breeze. I know where my parents are, can you go and save them? The girl said this as if she had exhausted all her courage in her life. Darcy and the other two soldiers looked at each other and said happily, "Of course." Chapter 93. When the old bell on the territory rang again, everyone knew that a new group of residents had arrived in grey and white collar. In order to expand the grey-collar population to a level that could catch up with other large towns in the western part of the Northern Territory, Linde chose simple and crude abductions. After all, there were many homeless people outside the territory. Moreover, these people were originally Lars, or people from the north, and could quickly integrate into the territory. ISA came to the entrance of the territory as usual and directed the church staff to take care of the new residents. Probably because church personnel are more friendly than soldiers, or maybe because these people have been cared for along the way, the civilians who come here basically abide by order. In winter, no one has the energy. There was a big fuss. Many people were tightly wrapped in their shabby clothes and leaned against the fire waiting to register. Although spies would definitely sneak in through such a rough screening, Linde meant that food should not be wasted because of choking. Population was more important than anything else. ISA also agrees with this. It is better to save one more person. It is impossible to turn a blind eye to the people outside just because there will be spies among the crowd. What's more, Villainous is there to check in, which can basically ensure that ordinary spies can't sneak in. While watching groups of people registering to enter the grey-collar field, Isha also started chatting with the waiting people as usual. The content includes but is not limited to the income situation of other places outside the western part of the northern border, daily meals, family size, prices, etc. From this miscellaneous information, ISA can piece together what the outside world has become now. The situation outside may be worse than when ISA first came to grey-white collar. In order to repay the debt, Lars even leased some territories to the demons. The demons had complete rights on the rented territories. Autonomy and law enforcement rights. The laws of the Northern Territory do not even apply in these concessions, and the laws of the demons must be used. It is not illegal for demons to kill northerners in the concession, and there are even places where northerners and dogs are not allowed to enter. But the irony is that some people in the north are trying their best to enter these concessions and find a job. Why? Because the demons are really restoring production order. As long as you become a slave of the demons, you can even exploit your own people by pretending to be powerful. When the summary of Isha's situation appeared on Linde's desk the next day, Linde suppressed his blush and pulled at his collar. For a moment, he seemed to feel that the heating circle in the study was turned on too high. Reina even slammed the door and left. Several maids couldn't hold her back. It was Linde who called Reina back, who was about to beat up her uncle. I almost fainted from the anger of the dog. Send troops. We must send troops. Reina was so angry that she cut Linde's desk into 2 pieces. Linde calmly called for someone to repair the desk and it would still be usable. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and said, "You can't stand even if you beat it down, too far away from us." From the damaged desk, Linde pulled out a map of the Northern Territory. The rental sites chosen by the demons were all very poor. They were all located as far away from the western border of the Northern Territory as possible. Some even reached the eastern border of the Cape Kingdom. Borderline. Can we start a war directly? As soon as Lina said it, she stamped her feet angrily. The current strategy was the result of discussions between Linde, the Great Elder, and some important military personnel. Although they have established a firm foothold in the western part of the northern border is too big. The defense of the entire western part is definitely more than enough, but if they want to attack, the supply line will be very long. No one understands what this strategic depth means better than Linde, who is a time traveler. As long as the opponent is not stupid, there will be enough time to reorganize and assemble the army, but for a war, you obviously cannot place your hopes on the opponent being full of idiots. On things. And according to the speculation of the Great Elder, there will be a high probability of a war between the royal capital and the Kingdom of Anjou next year. Once the war starts, it will be the best time for Linde to regain the Northern Territory. If war is declared now, he will not only have to face the demons and Lars, the royal capital might not stand idly by. That's why Linde issued winter production tasks to cultivate and develop with peace of mind during this long winter. Of course, war has always been dynamic, and even Linde's battle to recapture the western part of the northern border has not really ended. Until now, Linde's territory is still slowly expanding, but because there is no resistance, it touched the boundary of Lars' territory, so it didn't cause any waves. Both sides are stabilizing internal affairs, if Lars really has internal affairs. Linde thought for a while and realized that it was not impossible. If the production capacity was fully activated, there would definitely be a surplus in the production of weapons and equipment. Coupled with some economic means, although it could not directly destroy Lars, at least it can remind those demons that they don't have the final say in the north. The stronger the grey-white collar shows, maybe the other northerners will be able to live a better life. Just when Linde was about to finalize the policy and call Lila and Villainous to implement it, ISA suddenly said, "Mr. Governor, actually I am here not only to report, but also to say goodbye." "Farewell? Where are you going?" Linde did not understand that ISA could already be said to be a religious leader in the territory. Only ISA could connect the radical churches and ordinary churches and cooperate. The church is also generally more willing to follow ISA's arrangements. This is the reform plan for the goddess religion that I put together. Isha didn't explain anything and handed the plan to Linde. Linde quickly browsed through the pages and found that Isha had already compiled the liberation theology that he and ISA had talked about before, based on the current situation in the north. Come out. Page after page are all the results of ISA's continuous visits and investigations. Everything from the overall program of the church to the daily life of priests and nuns and the prayer methods of believers are explained and simplified. Not only does it warn the church to be down to earth, it also confirms that the church is a service industry, serving the believers of the goddess, rather than the so-called communication with God only through the church. As long as they can abide by the goddess's oracle, everyone is qualified to pray. Moreover, Isa's quotations from scriptures were completely logical, and even seemed to establish a sect. Linde suspected that even if the Central Holy See sent a pope to debate the scriptures, he would be killed by Isa, who now understands that practice brings true knowledge. Down. To be honest, the plan submitted by Isa made Linde sweat a little. If Linde was as bad as Doug Lars, Isa could have started a revolution with this edited version of the liberation theology plan. A people's war. But I don't know whether it was luck or misfortune. After all, Isha was born in a feudal era, and she grew up in a completely feudal environment in her early years. Perhaps it was Linde's efforts that gave Isa hope, or perhaps she knew what would happen if the church's power was out of control. In the end, Isa still referred to some of Flora's plans in this reform plan, and finally devolved the divine power. Under Linde's power. Sir Governor, do you still remember what you said when we were talking about problems when I first arrived at Grey Collar? I think it's time to put it into practice now. Reina was confused, but Linde understood. Isha was going to start her old job as a grey collar worker, but this time it was different. Linde could support her as Isha's backing. I understand. This time you have real holy water. I believe you can save more people. I will give you some weapons from the laboratory. Pay attention to safety and don't force yourself. Remember, this place will always be safe. It's your home and we welcome you back anytime. Isa nodded and saluted Linde as a clergyman. At this time, Reina also understood that Isa was going to Doug Lars' territory to continue saving people. I'm sending 2 white knights to you, and I'll let them protect you just like they protect me. Don't refuse. Before Isa could speak, Reina quickly ran out to shake people. It's impossible to do everything by yourself, and since you can't use magic now, it's better to bring a guard. Seeing Linde saying the same thing, Isa had no choice but to nod. Unexpectedly, the heroine eventually embarked on this path. The fragment of the dragon-slaying technique that Linde gave to Isa was also used. Fortunately, the target was not Linde himself. When Isa was about to leave, Linde warned, if there is a reliable resistance army, please remember to contact me. I will tell Doug Lars that the snow is not necessarily barren, and there may be something under the snow. There was an unexpected surprise. What surprise? Isa asked doubtfully. Who says weapons can't grow under the snow? Linde shrugged. Chapter 94. After winter, the elves of the ancient forest, led by the elf queen Avelia, completed the ritual of worshipping the god of nature. Although most elves are not affected by cold winter temperatures, because according to legend winter is the season when the god of nature rests, the elves follow their beliefs and turn on energy-saving mode in winter. It seems like there's going to be another war on the human side. After the sacrifice, the elf queen and the elders began their regular meetings for each season, and the subject of this meeting was undoubtedly the elves' neighbors for thousands of years. The ancient forest in winter is resting with the god of nature. I think we can send more rangers to the border to monitor human activities. As soon as the elf elders said this, the elders who also had big beards also nodded. Anyway, humans do this every few hundred years, and the elders are used to it. But this meeting is a little different. The elves' princess Tia, although it may take hundreds of years from a human perspective to take over her mother's responsibilities, can now start to participate in politics. This time Tia brought some very young elves to participate in the meeting. They are just some humans. Why should we blindly defend our borders? I think we can definitely send some elves to humans, not only to obtain intelligence, but also to prepare for the future. As soon as Tia's words came out, they immediately won the approval of the young elves present. The elves have been locked in the country for too long. Although the legend of the Gaj Empire is still circulating on the mainland, the number of elves traveling outside is too rare after all. Young elves are more eager to see the outside world. I originally thought that my proposal would be opposed by a group of old pedants like the night novels I secretly read, but I didn't expect that the elf elders would all show understanding smiles. Avelia, this little girl looks exactly like you when you were young. The elf queen's crystal face immediately turned red, and she interrupted, Sir Elder, this has nothing to do with the topic of this meeting. It has nothing to do with it. At that time, you were also clamoring to go to the Roman Empire. You said that the Roman Empire was nothing more than that. In the end, you were almost kidnapped by the prince. At that time, His Majesty Ives grabbed your ears and took you away. Come back. The elders exchanged words with each other and started chatting about gossips from thousands of years ago, causing the conference room to suddenly turn into Leadeng Tavern. The young elves listened to Her Majesty the Queen's gossip, their pupils trembled, and Tia looked at her mother in shock. Avelia had no choice but to knock the ground with the scepter in her hand, and the elf elders became quiet. So what do the elders think of Tia's proposal? As soon as Avelia finished speaking, an elder immediately took out a small piece of paper and read from it, I feel that contact with humans can not only improve our magic level, but also enable us to know ourselves and our enemies, so that we can fight without danger in the future. To better cope with the threats brought by the expansion of the human empire, I propose to send the elf princess to the Royal Academy of the Roma Empire as an exchange student for further study. The young elves were still wondering why elves wanted to learn magic from humans, but Avelia had already heard that this was an opinion she had made thousands of years ago. Bang! Bang! Two heavy knocks interrupted the elf elder's recitation of the small note. That's almost it. Avelia warned. Looking at the embarrassed Avelia, the elders stopped thinking and replied seriously, Her Royal Highness's proposal is not unreasonable. Now is different from 1,000 years ago. Human beings have reached a critical node that determines their destiny. In order to maintain the historical relationship with mankind, I think we should really contact the various forces of today's mankind. At this time, Tia, who finally came back from the dark history of her mother, asked aloud, Why do we still maintain the previous relationship with humans? I think our Gog Empire, as the only empire on the continent at present, can definitely go further. That's it. The elders shook their heads, and the elder who had held the small note stood up and asked, Your Highness, do you know how many races and countries there were on the mainland? The elder closed his eyes and said as if recalling, Sand Demon, Kobold, Basilisk, Lizard Man, Scale Insect, Primitive Orc. Another elder also took out a thick book, opened the catalogue, and said with the previous elder, Atheron, Feral, Tyros, the Kingdom of the Mountain, Sauron, Jimkis. What are these? Tia was a little confused. These are the races and countries that have been wiped out by humans since the recorded history of elves. Avelia explained. Thousands of years ago, humans collectively called us subhumans. In the eyes of humans at that time, we were just a subspecies of humans. But because we are demi-humans and very similar to humans, humans have always been. The demi-human race remained friendly. As for races that are unfriendly to humans. Avelia glanced at the thick book in the elf elder's hand. There's nothing you can do about it if you are not friendly. One of the oldest elf elders said, when the continent was still in chaos, what human messengers liked most was to point their noses at the king and scold them. If the king executed the human messengers in anger, then the human messengers with the army immediately rushed behind. Isn't this just a gangster? Dia and the young elves complained while listening to these ancient secrets. How do you think humans came to have such a large and fertile territory? If humans hadn't created a shackle called morality, I'm afraid there wouldn't be many races left on the continent. Finally, Avelia ended the topic and concluded, humans have a very poor memory. After all, they are not immortal species. Things of the previous generation may be forgotten after 100 or 200 years by the next generation. But humans have a very good memory. On the continent, human beings are the first race to start recording history. In human poetry, they even record the past tens of millions of years ago. So we still keep a distance from humans as before, but we must understand humans deeply enough. I think Tia's proposal is feasible. We should indeed send more elves to the human kingdom. The elders also nodded one after another, indicating that they approved Avelia's proposal, and some elders even started drafting the charter on the spot. Tia just watched inexplicably as her proposal was approved. The young elves also looked at each other in confusion, but also a little excited, discussing which human country they should go to after leaving the ancient forest. After the meeting, an elf elder came to Tia and asked Tia which human country she wanted to go to. Probably Anju. I heard that it is now the most powerful kingdom of mankind. Well, Anju is great. The new king there is enterprising and much better than the sluggish Kaput kingdom. As the elf elder said this, he accidentally dropped a letter from his sleeve and dropped it in front of Tia, and then left as if he hadn't seen it. Tia was a little strange and called the elder several times with the letter. The elder pretended to be too old and didn't hear. But when Tia saw the name on the envelope, she immediately hid the letter in her arms. This is a love letter written by the fourth Prince Roar to the elf princess Avelia during the old human empire. Chapter 95. So? In the end you chose my territory. If there were words on his face, Linde would be filled with speechlessness now. Otherwise? Wouldn't you be curious if it were you? How are the descendants of your mother's first love doing now? Tia was very calm and just showed her hands to Little Bear. That's true, but my family tree was destroyed along with the original territory, and this Roar is a first name, not a surname, right? Maybe it just has the same pronunciation. It's not impossible for a descendant of a refugee prince to use the name of his ancestor as his surname in order to hide his identity, right? Tia then explained, I read it from night novels. At this time, Reina also stood up with a shocked face and said, it makes sense. No, 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 why do you think you would use your ancestor's name as your surname to hide your identity? No way. They both asked at the same time. For a moment, Linde wondered if he had made a mistake. After all, he was the time traveler, and the two people opposite him were the local aborigines, although they didn't seem very reliable. Well, I originally thought it was unlikely, but after seeing you in person, I don't think so. After saying that, Tia also looked at Linde's appearance carefully. Reina immediately hugged Linde's arm alertly. Okay, okay. Linde waved his other hand and ended the farce. Anyway, it has been 1,000 years, and I have no interest in being a descendant of the prince of the old empire, but I still want to welcome you, the princess of the elves. There were also some rangers who came with Tia, most of them were young elves who were full of curiosity about things in the territory. Especially the huge obelisk on the territory. Based on the idea that everything has come, Linde wants to arrange some work for these elves, such as the construction of this obelisk. The elves are known as a magical race, so the construction of the arcane magic circle should be easy to grasp. But the reality is completely different from what Linde thought. Precisely because the elves are a magical race, the elves have no interest at all in arcane magic circles and magic triggers that allow everyone to use magic. However, because they are born with a very high affinity for magic, the elves can often quickly point out the errors and flaws in the operation of magic in the arcane magic circle. When it comes to the construction and compilation of the arcane magic circle, these elves are one of the best. Elves are not good at using runes, or in other words, elves are not good at using magic tools. Although they can still learn slowly through a long lifespan, they are far inferior to humans who can use runes like an arm. Linde touched his chin and thought about it. Their long lifespan, excellent magical affinity, coupled with their emphasis on agreements and contracts, and their belief in the god of nature make the elves' lives very simple and plain. It seems that elves are simply born to do this. Information for supervisory and maintenance personnel. If there is a chance in the future, Linde even wants to hire some elves to help maintain the obelisk. Out of politeness, Linde still took these elves to visit the territory. Most of the elves still had a good impression of Linde. After all, after Linde conquered the western part of the north, he took the initiative to follow the contract between humans and elves. Such honest human lords are rare these days. Tia has come into contact with many humans who were very humble at first, but once they gained power, they would immediately become hateful. But Linde was different. As early as when there was only one grey white-collar worker in the territory, Tia had actually come into contact with Linde through the ranger who delivered the magic stone. Linde gave people the impression that the more powerful he was, the more powerful he became. Be extra cautious. The human side of the Titan Mountains is now almost completely controlled by Linde. Linde can completely learn from the previous human lords and completely ignore the contract, pay less or not, and even the magic stones that the grey and white-collar workers need to deliver can be completely stopped. After all, Linde Germany no longer needs the protection of the elves. But Linde chose to find the ranger and draw up a new contract. Of course, this was not to continue to be taken advantage of. After all, the territory under the Titan Mountains was basically unified now, and there was no need to pay third-party fees to the elves. Therefore, this contract is more about the ruling on trade between the two parties. Do you actually have special vacations in your territory? Tia followed Linde as he strolled through the streets of the territory. Today happened to be the day of prayer. The streets were full of children wearing new clothes running around, while adults gathered in the church for weekly prayers. The human lords I have seen before are eager to make those slaves work even when they sleep at night. This is not a joke. We have actually seen your human alchemist study this potion, but in the end it was because of the cost. He's taller than a slave, so let's leave it alone. Is there still such a medicine? I guess the capitalists in Linde's previous life would like it very much. After all, under industrialization, there is still a question mark as to how expensive a bottle of medicine can be, but Linde believes that proper rest can improve production efficiency, even if it is only an ideal state. Linde is more willing to believe in this theory. Even machines need maintenance, let alone people. According to the Holy See, people should take a day to pray to the goddess every once in a while, sum up their lives, and reflect on their sins. Linde answered Tia's questions while greeting the residents on the road. What about you? Do you have any time off? Tia stopped and looked at the church not far away. You have neither faith nor sabbatical, right? Linde was non-committal. In fact, almost none of the top leaders in the territory took vacations. High-level intellectuals in this era were still too rare. Most of them could read, write, and arithmetic, which was already pretty good. So much so that the power in the territory is now almost concentrated in the hands of a few individuals. Especially after ISA left, almost all the pressure from the grassroots fell on Caroline, although she seemed not only to have no objections, but even more excited. But this is certainly not a long-term solution. Linde has absorbed a large number of old aristocrats and religious figures to form new bureaucrats and interest groups. However, even though Linde has lowered his standards, there are still many old aristocrats who cannot complete the ideological transformation. Once they gain power, they will be eager to restore their former status. Now that the entrance examination law has officially begun to be implemented, those old nobles who want to take advantage of opportunities may be unable to withstand it. I heard that many old nobles are planning to move to the neighboring territory recently, and Linde has chosen to turn a blind eye to them all. As long as the family property is left, everything will be easy. In the end, most of the elves were assigned to assist in the obelisk work. After all, although they were not good at building and compiling arcane mathematical arrays, the elves could help the professionals correct errors and check calculations, not to mention that most of the elves were originally. I am very curious about this obelisk. When Linde returned to the mansion, Reina came up to him, smelled Linde's body, and asked, "Brother, are you really not a descendant of the old empire?" Linde, who noticed the subtle change in the title, immediately comforted him, "If my family is really the descendant of the old empire, how could it end up like before? It's all Lucanus nonsense. Then why do I always feel that the elves take special care of you? And why do you even want that elf princess to come to our territory?" Reina somehow showed extraordinary insight in this regard. "You must explain it clearly to me today. Come on, come into the house with me." Chapter 96. So what materials are you looking for this time? The boss lady of Shuajin Merchant Alliance was still smoking in Linde's study as before. "No, the main reason I came to you this time is to ask you to help me transport some weapons. I need to deliver them to the resistance army in the territory next door." Linde handed over a list of items that needed to be shipped. I have to say that ISA's efficiency is still very terrifying, or maybe she really has destiny. Not long after she left, Linde sent a letter from ISA through a special channel. There was a group of knights from the old Lars family who were leading ordinary people to resist the tyranny of Doug Lars. After a short period of getting along, ISA immediately became the leader of this resistance army and led these people to fight. Guerrilla. Because of his strict discipline and measured advance and retreat, he is now even famous in the northern border. You know, our Shuajin Merchant Alliance has never participated in the wars between lords. We just want to do business. If other lords find out, it will be difficult to do this business. I'll add money. So how are we going to contact this resistance army? We can't even find Doug Lars. I'm afraid it will be even more difficult for us. After hearing the extra money, the landlady showed a satisfied smile and took out a few contracts with residual warmth from her proud chest. Of course you can also leave it to us directly to solve the problem. Here are some reference plans and we can chat with each other. Linde took the contracts and looked through them while saying, you just need to deliver the items to the designated place, and the rest of us will take care of it. Oh, those minstrels. The landlady rolled her eyes. Okay, then we really don't have to worry about it. Linde selected a contract that was more cost-effective. After confirming it, he signed his name. While pushing it back, he asked curiously, but does it really not matter if you directly participate in the war between the lords? Thank you for your concern. No one will care about a small gesture. What's more, compared to transporting weapons, I think the goods you sent to your neighbors may be more destructive, right? The landlady took a deep breath and then said, besides, how do you know that we didn't do some small tricks on your territory? Oh, you should know, after all, those bards are loyal to you now. You mean taking those borers out of my property? Linde recalled that he had indeed received this kind of information. They were probably just a group of old nobles who couldn't go on and wanted to move next door to restore the so-called family glory. Did they escape through the Shining Gold Merchant Alliance? But as mentioned before, as long as the family property is left behind, Linde can turn a blind eye to these people. It seems that you don't care about the departure of those people. This is the best. After all, you are our old customer. Don't worry, we have always done things in a measured way and will not interfere too much in the war between your lords. At most, we will not interfere in the war between your lords. Some private work. The landlady put the contract signed by Linde away and put it back in her chest. Like this time? Linde asked curiously. This time? No, how can this be considered private work? Didn't you read the contract carefully? You entrusted us with a batch of weapons to sell, but we accidentally lost them somewhere. The landlady smiled. Not long after, Isa led the resistance forces to a woods outside the territory of Suyi. Lord Saint, are there really weapons here? The leader of the resistance army, Linde, is a knight from the old Lars family. In the north, there are not a few resistance armies from these knights, but most of them take the opportunity to rob with their own retinues, and wait after the plunder. Doug Lars recruits his own. And people like Linde who lead civilian resistance can be said to be a minority among the minority. Linde himself is not like a knight, but more like a farmer farming. If the information from those bards is not wrong. Isa now took out the title of saint again, but this saint was not self-proclaimed, but was granted by the northern governor Linde. There is indeed no legal basis for this saint, but ordinary people don't know so much, and they don't know whether the governor is qualified to canonize a saint. They only know that this saint was sent by another Lars family. What's more, after Isha came into contact with the resistance army, she had cured many people with the medicine and holy water she brought. In the eyes of the resistance army, Isha was a well-deserved true saint. After arriving at the designated place, Isa nodded, Linde waved his hand upon seeing this, and the resistance troops immediately started digging in the snow. As boxes of weapons were dug out, Layton's mood changed from initial shock to numbness. Although he knew that Isa was sent by Lars, the other team on the grey-white collar side, which was Layton's original allegiance, Layton still couldn't imagine so many weapons and equipment. After all, Layton originally thought that the governor over there would only give him some ordinary weapons such as bows, arrows, and spears, but he didn't expect that all the weapons dug out were of the same type as the two guards around St. Isa. It is the so-called fire gun. As long as the trigger is pulled, it can defeat a fully armed non-professional soldier. Many people in the resistance army had seen the two guards beside Isa repelling Doug Lars' army with similar shaped weapons, but most people thought these were some precious magic props, so I never thought I could use the same style. Most people carefully touched the fire guns in the box. Because of Layton's order, no one dared to pick up these magic props without authorization. Lady Saint, can we really use such a precious weapon? Layton picked up a fire gun. The cold texture and solid weight made Layton feel extremely at ease as soon as he touched it. These are just weapons that have been eliminated by grey-collar workers. Isa picked up a firecracker and inspected it. It was definitely impossible to transport the latest firecrackers to be used by the resistance army. Most of them were old models that had been eliminated. The firecrackers delivered this time were in Iraq. When Shah left Grey Collar, its main purpose was to train new recruits. It is a model that is too backward and can be displayed. Are these eliminated? Layton suddenly felt that the world had become a little strange. Could such a terrifying weapon be just an outdated model? Are the Grey Collar workers and his own really still in the same world? Most of the items delivered were firecrackers, ammunition, and medicines. There were no ray guns, but they were enough for the resistance to deal with most of the enemy troops. Soldiers who were not fully enchanted could not stop the firecrackers from firing. Of course, there are armors, but not many. After all, ISA does not have the means to charge enchanted armors, and because it is guerrilla warfare, armors are too redundant. These armors are from the resistance army, which Linde heard about. Only professionals brought it here. Seeing these weapons and equipment, ISA breathed a long sigh of relief. As her resistance army became more and more active, the army that came to encircle and suppress them had gradually changed from a miscellaneous army to Doug Lars' regular army. Fortunately, there has not yet been a situation where the protagonist has just started to develop and the enemy has already brought all the troops to the novice village to block the gate. After all, there are quite a few resistance armies under the name of Old Lars. Doug Lars SI has no ability or energy to distinguish which ones are genuine and which ones are fake. Chapter 97. Sam is an ordinary student at Wangdu Academy, but he is also a native of the north. It is precisely because he is from the north that Sam supports Kaldek more enthusiastically than those students. Although Sam has not returned to the north for a long time, this does not prevent Sam from verbally criticizing Archduke Lars. Because only in this way can he integrate into the environment of the royal capital. But even though Sam was already more enthusiastic than everyone else, the eyes of the students looking at Sam were still full of disdain. And with the death of Grand Duke Lars, the trend in the royal capital changed again, becoming the so-called freedom and equality, and all students were proud to fight for the interests of the demons. It's a pity that although Sam longed to be a dog for the demons, he now had to return to the north. Because prices continue to rise, and Sam's parents' business has not been very good recently, Sam has no choice but to give up studying. Although his father has always said that the alchemy courses in the royal capital are of no use at all, it is better to return to the north to follow. Learn alchemy yourself. Sam's parents are an alchemist and a pharmacist respectively, which is the most common combination in small alchemy workshops. It is precisely because of this that Sam's life was relatively wealthy before. After all, both parents are professionals. But when Sam returned to the north, he discovered that the prices of various medicines had been reduced to extremely low prices, even close to the cost price. Originally, only the recovery potions were very low in price, but starting from this winter, the prices of various strengthening potions and purification potions have also dropped all the way, so much so that the parents of the handicraft workshop can no longer afford Sam's tuition. These alchemy potions are the same as the previous recovery potions. They are all engraved with the family emblem of the North Wind Bear. It is obvious that they come from the grey and white collars, and they make no secret of it. I heard that the grey and white collars are recruiting alchemists. How about we give it a try? Sam's father is very open-minded. After all, the three members of the family are professionals and they will never starve to death. No. Sam directly stopped him and said, the grey collar Governor Linde is a destroyer of peace, a man-eating devil viscount, and he also discriminates against demons. How can you, parents, give up your freedom for the temptation of a little money? Sam's father looked at his son with some confusion and asked aloud, why did you give up your freedom? I think the grey collar workers are giving people holidays. Sam's mother also interrupted, and the prices there are relatively stable. I heard from my sister in Doug's castle that Governor Doug is going to implement a new currency issued by himself, and it will require forced exchange. We still have time to run away. But Sam still said loudly, Governor Linde over there has inherited the status of Grand Duke Lars. Parents, do you still want to return to the rule of Grand Duke Lars? Really? Sam's father said in surprise, that's great. Since the death of Archduke Lars, the north has become a mess. Back to the time of Archduke Lars, we can continue to earn some tuition for you. And I heard that the taxes there are low, maybe we can save some money. Sam's mother opened the account book, and there was a small note inside, which promoted grey and white collar workers. These small pieces of paper recently there are more and more articles and leaflets. I don't want any tuition fees or savings. I want freedom. I want equality. I want peace. Sam yelled hysterically, Mom and Dad, why don't you understand? Starving to death is a small thing, but losing freedom is a big thing. What did Governor Linde do? He actually refused to let the demons enter his territory. Does he know how miserable the demons were in the past? They could only be squeezed into the eternal frozen soil without enough food. Afterwards, Sam seemed to enter a certain state and said sadly, but even in the eternal frozen soil, the demons are still optimistic. They even say that the eternal frozen soil gives them true freedom. They rely on their perseverance to survive. Developed on the eternal frozen soil, what a smart and tough race. Sam's father looked at his son as if he were a fool, as if he regretted sending his son to the royal capital to study. No matter what you say, we have to leave here. The business really can't continue. Only some old customers are left to buy potions from us. If you don't want to go to the grey collar workers, just stay and make some for those old customers. How about making some potions and keeping our family's brand name? After thinking about it, Sam's father decided to obey his son. After all, this was his own cub. Otherwise, what else could he do? Although Sam's mother looked helplessly at the two men who were both mentally ill, she finally had no choice but to say, if you have any difficulties, just write to us. We should save the little money we have left at home. Your father and I will also save it secretly. A lot of silver leaf coins and gold shield coins came down, and they were placed by your bedside at home. If Governor Doug really comes to exchange money in the future, just give some of them casually, but don't exchange them all. Got it? Looking at his parents who were still discussing money issues in front of him, Sam was a little irritated. His parents' ideas were far inferior to those of the nobles in the royal capital. Sure enough, the vision of low-level professionals was still too low. After constantly warning himself not to be like his parents, Sam bid farewell to his parents and ran his own pharmacy. But soon, Sam began to understand his parents somewhat. Not only potions, but also almost all products related to alchemy, the prices were infinitely close to the cost price. Sam did some calculations and found that the prices of these alchemy products from grey white collar were basically cost price plus shipping fee. Although they are just some low-level alchemy props, and the prices are not very low for ordinary people. It is incredible that ordinary people can consider alchemy products. So how does that grey-collar worker make money? Sam can even imagine his parents being imprisoned by the evil governor and put into a black-hearted factory to produce potions day and night. Thinking of this, Sam felt a little sad. After all, no matter how weak they were still his parents. A person's life is very free, but it is also very difficult. Sam soon discovered that the real reason why his parents could not survive was that except for the low price of medicines, other prices were very high. People don't need alchemy, but they really have to eat. When Sam was in the royal capital, all standards were in line with those of the princes and nobles, and they had plenty of meat and fish, but now in the north, he can't even afford an egg. Looking at the gold and silver coins left by his parents, Sam gritted his teeth and decided to hold on for a while. Not long after, Sam heard from a passing adventurer about the demon concession. Sam felt relaxed and happy after hearing this. The demons are good, they are smart and civilized. Sure enough, although Governor Doug abandoned the dark side and turned to the bright side, he was still a member of the Lars family, so he still got the demon tribe's concession and learned a lot in the royal capital. With this ability, he will definitely shine in the demon clan's concession. Chapter 98. Carrying large and small bags, Sam arrived at the demon clan rental area and breathed in the fresh air greedily. The place where the demons rule is good, there is a breath of freedom everywhere. The most important thing is that unlike the royal capital and the place where Daoj ruled before, where there are starving people and beggars everywhere, there is not a single poor person here. As an alchemist and an advanced member of the royal capital, Sam confidently came to the consulate in this concession with the on freedom he had written, preparing to introduce himself. When he was in the royal capital, he had followed the heroic prime minister. Kotick shouted together, "Peace, not war." At that time, he was even praised by Prime Minister Kotick. Although it was just a compliment in his eyes, Sam felt that he was already different from those common people. Sam believed that the great and wise demons would definitely be convinced by his on freedom and that he would become as great a person as Prime Minister Kotick. "Hello, I want to see the consul here. I am a student of Prime Minister Kotick. I hope you can be accommodating." After speaking, Sam also handed over his identity introduction, which was somewhat similar to a resume. But the human guard standing at the door didn't even look at it. He threw the pile of waste paper back and pointed at the bulletin board next to the consulate. On the most conspicuous part of the notice board were written a few bright characters, "Humans and dogs are not allowed." Sam immediately explained, "I am not one of those ordinary humans, I am a professional, and I have spoken for the demons in the capital. I am not the lowly human being as written above." "How many steps?" The tone of the human guard at the door was still cold, as if it was even colder than the cold wind this winter. 2, second level. Sam's momentum weakened, but the human guard at the door rang a bell and called a green-skinned demon. After explaining Sam's situation, the demon led Sam into the consulate. Sam was a little excited. Was his chance finally coming? However, Sam was not taken to a place like the study or living room. Instead, he was taken directly to the restaurant. In the restaurant, a demon was eating and drinking. On the dining table most of the dishes packed with food were eaten and then thrown away. "What's your specialty?" the hill-like demon asked Sam while eating. Sam immediately took out a stack of paper from his backpack and started talking. The above are all summed up by Sam based on Kotick's speech, which mainly talked about the harm of war. When it was finally said that the war brought only the grins of those with vested interests, and when he was about to continue talking about how the demons should maintain peace against the old Lars, the hill-like demons rudely interrupted Sam's conversation and asked directly, "Can you make strengthening potions?" Sam immediately asked nervously, "What kind of strengthening potion do you want?" After the attendant pulled Sam aside to explain, Sam said blankly, "No, it won't. This kind of potion is completely illegal, and basically only those wild pharmacists on the black market can make it. Regular alchemists and pharmacists like Sam can only make supplements, but cannot make such powerful medicines." As soon as he finished speaking, Sam was roughly thrown out. Even though Sam was still shouting about peace and freedom, the guards were dismissive. On the cold and dry streets of the north in winter, Sam was shivering from the cold. Because this is a leased area of a euro the demons, there is no professional union that can provide accommodation at low prices. The hotel saw that Sam was a foreigner, so the asking price was very high. Just when Sam was about to find another place to spend the night, he saw a demon with a few humans driving people away on the street. The consul is kind-hearted and doesn't look down on the poor. As the demons spoke, they kicked the humans who were shivering in the cold wind and drove them away. In the end, after being robbed of most of his money by demons on the road in the name of human taxes, Sam found a place where homeless people gathered to survive the night, and then left in a hurry. After all, he only had the hidden treasure left on him. Travel expenses. After returning to the old house left by his parents, Sam looked at his carefully written essay on freedom and slapped the table angrily. Sam felt that he had been deceived. The demons did not seem to love peace as much as he imagined. Otherwise, why would the demons not pay attention to his freedom theory at all? Moreover, the leased land is full of discrimination. The demons repeatedly emphasized that they were discriminated against by humans in the royal capital. But in fact, Sam discovered that he had encountered all the cases of discrimination mentioned by the demons in the royal capital in just 2 days in the leased land. Arrive. This made Sam suspect that the group of demons in the royal capital were just forcing what they had done on humans. But life still has to go on. After a trip to the demonic rental land, Sam's property shrank directly, and Sam even had the idea of a euro escaping to Grey Collar to find his parents. No matter what, we can't go to that demon governor's territory. Just when Sam was thinking this, the bell outside the door rang. It turned out to be a soldier from the Doug army notifying Governor Doug that he had promulgated a new currency. From today on, all transactions in the territory must be carried out by this currency. Money is required, otherwise all property will be confiscated. At the same time, the soldier also explained that this was a free currency issued to fight against the Grey Collar workers. Every exchange was a support for Governor Doug and a blow to the evil old Lars forces. Sam was a little reluctant. After all, the Doug coins issued by Doug were banknotes. Who would want to exchange a pile of gold and silver for waste paper? After hesitating for a while, Sam followed his mother's instructions and only changed part of it. And when Sam used it for 2 days, he found that the purchasing power of this banknote seemed to be stronger. Many people frantically exchanged their gold and silver for this banknote. After all, it is the governor's credibility. The governor said, never overdo it. In the midst of these assurances, in order to support Governor Doug's cause of freedom, Sam exchanged all the money in his hand for this kind of paper Doug coins, and then bought alchemy materials and food, and settled in his own house. The family began to make the potion on the previous order. However, 2 weeks later, when Sam came to a bar in the town, he saw people in the bar drinking hard. Sam was puzzled and stepped forward and asked, "Brother, what day is it today? What's wrong with everyone? Why do you drink so fast?" The strong man in front of Sam finished his drink and said, "If you don't drink, hurry up, the price may go up later." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the bartender preparing to change the sign that said 700,000 Doge coins to 900,000. Upon seeing this, the strong man hurried to pay the bill. Sam was stunned and touched the 20,000 Doge coins in his pocket. This was a huge amount of money 2 weeks ago, but now he couldn't even afford a glass of wine. Immediately realizing that something was wrong, Sam rushed to the post office, but found that he could not even afford the Doge coins to send the letter, and even a piece of bread cost almost 500,000 Doge coins, and the price was even rising. Just like that, Sam went bankrupt. Desperate, Sam took the remaining grain and alchemy materials and prepared to escape and find his parents. However, on the way to escape, Sam encountered the demons and Doug's soldiers who were catching strong men. Wait. I'm a professional, I don't need to join the army. Sam immediately shouted at the soldiers and demons, but unexpectedly the soldiers and demons became even more excited after hearing it. Professional, that means he has a lot of money, right? He doesn't look like a combat professional. As the soldiers spoke, they slowly approached Sam. As Sam slowly retreated, they became more sure that Sam was not a combat professional. They immediately swarmed up and snatched the package from Sam's hand. Wait. That's the last bit of food I have. I can make potions. Please don't take any more food from me. Sam cried in despair, but the soldiers tore the package apart while discussing where to bury Sam later. At this time, Sam heard a muffled sound, followed by more noises. The demons with soldiers fell down one after another, and Sam saw bright flowers of blood exploding on the opponent's chest. This flower was so perfect that Sam's resentment seemed to pour out with the blooming flower. Are you okay? A man who looked like a farmer and was holding a strange fire stick came to Sam's side. Seeing that Sam was still stunned, the uncle who looked like a farmer stretched out his hand and introduced himself, Linde, Lars Resistance Army. Sam, who originally hated the so-called Resistance Army, grabbed Leiden's arm a little crazy at this moment. You want to fight against the demons and Doug, right? I want to join you. In front of 500,000 Doug coins, Sam forgot what he had said in the capital and chose to join the war. A few days later, when ISA came to the Leiden camp, some resistance recruits were training how to use firearms. Didn't Grey White Collar just bring bolt-type fire guns? ISA listened to the sounds from the shooting range with a look of disbelief on her face. A new recruit came here a few days ago. He even pulled out the phantom when he pulled the bolt. The current speed is the limit of the fire gun, not his. Leiden explained. Chapter 99. Sharon was hesitant in front of the governor's mansion. There were fewer and fewer people going in for interviews. It was obvious that Sharon was worried about whether she could succeed in the interview. Although the governor is very approachable, he is still the governor after all. Even in the former Royal Capital Academy, it was difficult for Sharon to come into contact with people of this class. What's more, Sharon has no confidence in teaching students. After all, according to her age, she should be just a student. In this hesitation, Sharon kept fiddling with her scarf, and finally waited for the maid to summon her. I heard that your brother works at the obelisk, right? Linde raised his eyes and looked at the girl in front of him. She was gentle and quiet. Although her hair was a little messy due to the wind, it was not difficult to see her unique student temperament. Sharon was a little nervous, especially after seeing the Lord's wife and the elf princess beside him. This did not look like the lineup that should appear when applying for a basic teacher. Yes, my brother Barlow is working on your obelisk. He is already compiling the third sub-formation. Linde was impressed by the name, so he took out the report and read it carefully. Barlow worked very hard. He was currently the person with the most skilled compilation of sub-arrays, and he was also Sean's friend. The foundation is very clean, and there will definitely be no problem in the political review. I remember Barlow, he was a very hard-working man and his name will be engraved in the first row of the obelisk. And you also had sores, right? Are you better now? That unknown disease is now called acne, and grey-collar workers already have a complete set of methods and facilities to combat it. Sharon, who didn't expect that the Lord would recognize her and her brother, was very pleasantly surprised. She nodded and said, "Yes, thanks to you and the nuns, I basically no longer cough up blood. I almost forgot that I had sores, and when I was in the capital, I thought I was going to die, all thanks to you." Linde stretched out his hand to interrupt Sharon's flattery and asked with concern, "Why are you applying for this primary school teacher? I remember that the salary of the obelisk workers is enough for the whole family and there is still some left over. What happened? Is it difficult?" Sharon also came back to her senses and said, "No, thank you for your concern, Mr. Governor, but my illness has obviously been cured, but my brother has been keeping me at home. I once listened to the sermons of Saint Isa. You always have to work, and people can only find their own value in labor, so I want to find something to do for myself." Linde nodded, and then asked a few more academic questions. After confirming Sharon's common language and mathematics skills, he formally admitted her. When signing the contract, Linde took out a letter from the table and asked, "You are from the royal capital, right?" "Yes, Lord Governor." Sharon signed the contract and said, "My brother and I are both from the royal capital. Is there any problem? Do you know this Griya from the Nightingale Opera House?" As soon as Linde finished speaking, Sharon's eyes burst out with a fanatical light. "Are you talking about Ms. Griya from the Nightingale Opera House? My brother and I are both big fans of hers. Is she going to perform in grey collar?" "Probably." Linde took out a letter with the nightingale symbol on it. "They said they will come to visit us next week, but we don't know yet whether they will perform or not." Of course, the letter stated that he hoped to perform in grey collar, but in the end whether he could perform or not still required Linde's consent. The most important thing is that according to the information provided by Lucanus, Griya's influence is very great, and her political leanings are very obvious, and she is generally the type who was deceived by Kotick. But he is not a bad person. He once raised funds for children in the north and even sponsored miners from the demon clan in the royal capital. You must know that although those nobles claim to be powerful, in fact they don't want to spend a penny, and they still despise each other with the demons in their hearts, but Griya can support them in public places by holding the children of the demons. It can be said that the noble 8 streets with clear goals have been thrown away. This is all information provided by Lucanus. The intelligence capabilities of the bards are indeed good, but the only shortcoming is that they are too objective. On some things, what Linde needs is the subjective evaluation of some ordinary people. For example, regarding Griya, Linde needed to know more about her status in the hearts of people in the royal capital and other areas. Really? Does Miss Griya really want to come to our territory? Looking at Sharon's shining eyes, Linde already had a rough idea of a Griya's status in the hearts of the people in the capital. "I will definitely come, so can you tell me how you or the people in the royal capital view this Miss Griya?" Miss Griya is the goddess in the opera world. Lord Governor, you must take the time to watch Miss Griya's Song of the Stars, as well as The Curse of the Black Forest and Swan Dance. I think Griya's Missia performed the best opera. Miss Griya is simply the swan sister herself, but my brother prefers Miss Griya's Blood Rose. Sharon announced a series of opera names like names of dishes. Linde just waited quietly for Sharon to finish. It wasn't until he almost finished introducing Griya's life that Sharon realized that she was standing in front of the governor. "I'm sorry, Governor, I'm not usually like this." "It doesn't matter." In any case, Linde once again confirmed Griya's influence among the people in the royal capital. It would be better to say that Griya's influence is actually very wide. Only the real small frontier lords like the original owner Linde have never heard of it. Oh, there is another person who has been in the royal capital who has never heard of Griya. Linde glanced at Reina who was sitting next to him. Reina looked at Linde doubtfully, and then showed a bright smile. Well, according to Reina, she once went to see an opera in the royal capital, but she fell asleep just after the opening and slept until the end of the opera. Except for people in remote frontiers and people like Reina who don't care about opera at all, Griya can be regarded as a national idol of this era. "Then Governor, can I tell others this news? My brother will be very happy if I tell him." "Of course, if there is no problem with Ms. Griya's schedule." After getting Linde's affirmative answer, Sharon ran out excitedly. "So? Are you really going to let this Griya perform in your territory?" Tia was a little confused. She had also read Griya's information, even the letter Griya sent to Linde. It was all filled with rumors about grey-collar workers and some weird words. Even Reina could tell that Griya seemed to be here to cause trouble. She's not a bad person. Linde collected the letter and Griya's information. So I believe she will make a fair judgment on the grey-collar workers. Of course, I will approve the performance. After all, there is really little entertainment in the territory now. Even in winter, the grey and white-collar streets are still very lively. In order to prevent a large number of well-fed young people from taking to the streets to make trouble, Linde has invented military football to vent the anger of these old men. At the same time, spiritual entertainment must also keep up. Otherwise, this group of people would discuss the life experience of their governor every day, which would become more and more evil. Griya's visit this time is a good opportunity, and we can take advantage of this opportunity to establish an art troupe. Of course, although Linde is ready to approve Griya's performance, the repertoire still needs to be reviewed. Although Linde believes that even if Griya is full of private goods and fails to make a fair judgment, his people will still have a fair judgment. This was the reason Linde allowed Griya to visit and perform. Chapter 100. When the carriage with the nightingale mark drove into the north, Griya's last doubt about Prime Minister Kotick's description of the north was dispelled. Looking out the car window, it is even more miserable than the northern border described by Kaldek. Because the activities of the resistance army have become more and more intense recently, many nobles have taken the initiative to send troops to protect Gria. Of course, these nobles sending troops were not really worried that the resistance army would attack the Nightingale Opera House. After all, the resistance army's military discipline may be much stronger than the troops of these nobles. What these nobles are really afraid of is that the unsighted military leaders in their territories will rob the Nightingale Opera House's fleet. After all, those military leaders will only rob people when they see them. The convoy of the Nightingale Opera House moves very slowly, because as soon as Gria sees people begging on the road, she will stop the convoy to help. Although the steward of the Nightingale Opera House has been complaining about this matter, there is nothing that can be done. Gria's influence is too great, and she is the mother-in-law of the Nightingale Opera House, so even if the entire convoy complains one after another, no one objected. The child hasn't eaten for 2 days. The last time he ate was the bark of a sweet bark that his father snatched from someone else. This is a specialty of the north. It is usually used to add a little fiber of this tree to the paste to add a little sweetness. Almost no one uses this tree as a staple food. After all, it is just a kind of food. Just bark with a sweet taste. But now, the sweet trees that were already scarce in winter are almost gone. Gria felt extremely distressed when she heard that. She took out the puffed bread passed by the attendant and handed it to the child in her arms. The child immediately started gobbling it up. The woman looked at the bread in the child's hand and swallowed her saliva. Gria immediately waved her hand and said, "Let's eat here today and prepare some food for this lady." "Thank you, miss, thank you, miss." The woman was about to kneel down and kowtow. Although she wanted to kiss Gria's shoes, she was obviously not qualified. After eating, the woman finally regained some strength and started chatting with Gria. It was still possible to survive. After all, the child's father is a craftsman and the family has some savings. Maybe they can save some money to send the child to a church school. But aren't church schools free? Gria was a little strange. Along the way, this northern territory was indeed very similar to the northern territory described by Kaldek, but it seemed a little different. Originally it was free, but since the death of the Archduke, life has become more and more difficult. The church school has also begun to require gifts for the priests before they can enter. Gria was stunned when she heard this, but she still patiently held the woman's dry, black palm and continued to listen to the woman's story. "We originally had a little money, but then Lord Doug became rich." The attendant on the side corrected, "It's the governor." "Oh, Mr. Governor." The woman recited this awkward word unskillfully and continued, "Governor Doug issued new money. Everyone must use this new money to sell and buy. If they are caught using the old money, they must give it to them. Take all the money." Originally, it was okay, because the money seemed to be able to buy more things, and everyday soldiers said that the money was made by the governor who invited the royal alchemist to make it, and it would never be used too much. Others also said there's no way to imitate it. Anyway, everything is good, and our family doesn't understand it, so we just take it and replace it. Then all the money was gone. Our family exchanged a total of several $1,000s. In the end, a loaf of bread cost hundreds of thousands. My father had to spend it as soon as he got his wages every day, otherwise the money would be worthless. Later, no one asked his father to work for him, because everyone had no money, so his father had no choice but to sell himself to the master to earn a living. After saying that, the dark and thin woman couldn't help crying. "Can you show me the new money?" After Gria finished speaking, the child handed over a piece of paper with snot stuck on it. The attendant wanted to stop it, but Gria still took it. This is indeed a banknote, with Doug's face printed on it. It's probably because Doug gave up the Northwind Bear family crest and could only have his own face printed on it, or maybe it's just plain stinky. Gria just pulled it gently and knew that the quality of the banknotes was very poor, not much better than the ones she used to use the toilet. The nobles along the way did not mention these things at all, because the nobles themselves still used old silver leaf coins for transactions and did not use the new money at all. Looking at the mother and son in front of her, Gria wanted to take out some silver leaf coins to help, but thinking that these silver leaf coins could not be used for transactions now and might be taken away by soldiers, Gria could only let them go. The attendant left some food, and then braved the wind and snow and left the short cave where the mother and son lived. Don't worry about food and supplies. Anyway, when you get to the next territory, the local lords and nobles will immediately help Gria replenish them. This is why Gria can provide relief while walking. A few days later than originally expected, Gria finally arrived in the river valley. This was originally the territory of Doug's nephew Sean, but now it has become Doug's main city. No one knows whether it is because it is the richest here, or because the resistance here is the fiercest and requires Doug to suppress it personally. "Dear lady, your arrival has made the wind and snow in the north fall in love with you." Doug dressed in his most gorgeous clothes and went out of the city to greet him, but the first thing Gria saw was not the clothes Doug wore that flashed crazily like a mirror, but the somewhat bleak streets in the distance. Although they have always been prejudiced against the north, the river valley is also a fertile and wealthy area for most nobles. Even in winter, there are an endless stream of merchants and lights on the streets. It is difficult to imagine this desolate land. The dead city-like place is the richest city in the north. Gria nodded slowly and did not listen to the series of flattery from Doug. When entering the city, this feeling of desolation hit her face directly. It wasn't until she entered the inner city that Gria felt the familiar feeling, the smell of being drunk and wealthy. This feeling is even stronger than when Gria was in the capital. At night, Doug introduced Gria in the most solemn way. "Dear ladies and gentlemen, tonight, We are fortunate to welcome the glory of this city, this artist who has fascinated countless people. Every note of hers is like the starlight falling from the sky, and every melody is like the gentle breeze. A gentle touch that soothes the soul. She is a spirit on the stage, using her unparalleled talent to push the art of opera to a new peak. Her performance is not only a display of skills, but also an emotional resonance and a sublimation of the soul. Every time she appears, it is a baptism of the soul. The nobles stood and applauded. An area of a euro the castle was specially transformed by Doug into a layout similar to an opera house. Feeling the familiar atmosphere, Gria immediately appeared on the stage with the blessing of various light effects magic, and conquered the nobles in the audience with a stunning libretto. The main purpose of Gria's visit to the north this time was to perform charity performances and solicit donations, and the nobles in the audience also donated generously. But Gria knew that these nobles didn't care where the money went, and even regarded the money as rewards for themselves. As for fundraising, if these nobles were really kind-hearted, they would not let the money go to the people in the territory. The people were chewing the bark of the tree. Gria's follow-up condition was not very good, and the opera ended quickly, but no nobles cared. After all, Gria's operas were relatively popular, which made many nobles not like Gria very much. Moreover, the most important significance of Gria's arrival to these nobles is that they have one more opportunity to socialize. The opera is just a diversion during the ball. Although Doug expressed himself crazily in front of Gria, and even talked about poetry and the ancestor of opera, Gria's attention was entirely on the noble next door who was bragging about how much he had made with Doug coins. Doug just rolled with it. Gria has seen this kind of thing many times in the royal capital. She has only two purposes, that is, to climb into her own bed, or to let herself climb into their bed. Doug is the most impatient among these people. That kind of thing. The person in charge of the Nightingale Opera House directly stood up and took over the conversation between Gria and Doug. Gria was now the lifeblood of the Nightingale Opera House. She did not have to sell herself as a performer, nor could she pay more. The people in the north are really suffering, Gria kept lamenting in her heart, and she was even more worried about the upcoming trip to the Grey Collar Field. Even the Doug territory, which has taken refuge in the royal capital and embraced freedom, is living in such misery, so how can the Grey-White Collars, known as the Devil's Viscount territory, fare better? What's worse is that in Doug's territory, the nobles along the way will help with supplies because of their face. After arriving in the western part of the north, how much supplies will there be? Will my face still matter? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you are notified of future uploads. You can find the next parts in the playlist visible on the screen or on my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.